Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Shawna Nelson. Heather Hodges and Ignacio Gose met at a university party, where Ignacio's friendly and charming personality immediately caught Heather's eye. It was instant attraction for both of them, and they soon realized they had fallen in love. Heather was a vibrant person with an innocent charm. Her striking features, including pale skin, red lips, and dark hair, captivated Ignacio, who affectionately nicknamed her Snow White. When Ignacio asked Heather out on their first date, she was thrilled and shared the news with her roommates, who joined in her excitement. As their relationship grew stronger, Ignacio continued to shower Heather with affection, surprising her with her favorite flowers and coffee. His thoughtful gestures made Heather feel loved and valued. After graduating from the University of Northern Colorado, Ignacio decided to take their relationship to the next level, proposing to Heather and receiving a happy yes in response. Heather set one non-negotiable condition for their engagement. If Ignacio ever cheated on her, she would end their marriage instantly, no matter how sorry he was or how hard he tried to make things right. She made it clear that infidelity was a deal-breaker and she wouldn't tolerate it. Heather and Ignacio got married within a year, surrounded by loved ones on a joyful and beautiful day. After that, Ignacio became a police officer in Gray, Colorado, while Heather worked as a supervisor at the local credit union. Her colleagues and clients adored her for her exceptional ability to comfort them during difficult times. One co-worker even described her as wonderful in every way. After 5 years of marriage, Heather and Ignacio decided to have a child. They were overjoyed when Heather gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Victoria. As a mother, Heather's entire world centered around her daughter, and she felt immense happiness. Ignacio also turned out to be an exceptional father. From the outside, it seemed like Heather and Ignacio had the perfect life. In 1997, Heather's life was forever changed when her father passed away from a heart attack. Just days later, her mother was diagnosed with cancer. Heather took on the enormous responsibility of caring for her ailing mother, selflessly dedicating herself to her care. Her mother eventually passed away in 2003. Heather's husband, Ignacio, was a devoted and caring partner who helped take care of their daughter Victoria and managed household chores. After providing emotional support to Heather during her difficult time, Ignacio's focus shifted towards his co-worker, Shawna Nelson, a dispatcher at the Gray Police Department. Shawna was married to Ken, a deputy at the Wells County Sheriff's Office, and they had 2 children together, but their marriage was struggling. At first, Shawna and Ignacio's interaction was friendly, but it gradually became flirtatious. They started exchanging playful comments and compliments, which caught Ignacio's attention. Over time, Shawna captivated him, and his interest deepened. Ignacio spent more time with Shawna, and their connection evolved into a strong emotional bond. As they continued to see each other, their feelings intensified. Their playful flirting turned into passionate and intimate feelings. Despite being married to others, they found themselves powerless against their attraction. The affair between Ignacio and Shawna became the center of town gossip, but Heather remained unaware of her husband's infidelity. Everyone knew the situation, but no one had the courage to tell Heather the truth. As a result, Shawna and Ignacio's secret relationship grew stronger while Heather remained unaware. When Shawna discovered she was pregnant, she excitedly told Ignacio the news. However, Ignacio was not happy and started doubting whether he was the father of the baby, suspecting that it might be her husband Ken's instead. Shawna reassured Ignacio that Ken was not the father because he had a vasectomy after their second child. Knowing that he would face severe consequences if Heather found out, Ignacio became anxious. He didn't want the baby and frantically searched for a solution with Shawna's consent. Heather had no idea that her husband, Ignacio, was having an affair with Shawna. Shawna, however, grew tired of being secretive and decided to confront Heather. One day, Shawna, accompanied by her friend Michelle, followed Heather to the grocery store. Shawna and Michelle discreetly trailed Heather around the store, watching her every move. Meanwhile, Heather, unaware of their presence, chatted with a friend on her phone. Eventually, Shawna approached Heather and hurled insults and accusations at her. The encounter left Heather deeply disturbed. Determined to get answers, Heather confronted Ignacio about the incident. She knew Shawna from his work Christmas parties and was aware that Shawna was his co-worker at the police department. When Heather asked Ignacio why Shawna, who had always been friendly towards her, would suddenly attack her in the grocery store, Ignacio explained that Shawna had romantic feelings for him, but reassured Heather that she had nothing to worry about. Ignacio promised Heather that he would tell Shawna to leave her alone. He followed through on his promise and confronted Shawna, telling her to stop bothering Heather. However, Shawna became very angry with him and refused to back off. Despite Ignacio's efforts, Shawna continued to harass Heather. One day, Shawna even showed up at Heather and Ignacio's house, demanding to speak with Ignacio. This made Heather suspicious of Ignacio's true intentions. Unbeknownst to Heather, Shawna had confided in a co-worker at the county dispatch center about her affair with Ignacio, revealing her strong feelings for him. Shawna expressed frustration that Heather, Ignacio's wife, was standing in the way of their relationship. According to the co-worker, Shawna also mentioned that she would relieve her frustrations by shooting at targets at the shooting range, imagining that the targets were Heather. Shawna had been having an affair with Ignacio for over a year, but her husband, Ken, remained unaware of the situation until he discovered Shawna's journal, which detailed her relationship with Ignacio. After discovering Shawna's infidelity, Ken chose to stay in the relationship for the sake of their children. Meanwhile, Shawna was aware that Ignacio was having multiple affairs, which motivated her to maintain control over him. She threatened to expose his secrets to Heather if he ever left her. Shawna's obsession with Ignacio intensified, and in July 2005, she got a tattoo of his family name on her leg to solidify her connection to him. Shawna's behavior became increasingly unhealthy, crossing into stalking territory. If Ignacio and Heather took their daughter Victoria out, Shawna and her family would coincidentally appear at the same restaurant. Despite recognizing Shawna's concerning behavior, Ignacio continued their affair. When Shawna became pregnant with Ignacio's second child, she insisted on keeping the baby, refusing to consider termination. Shawna had a son named Christian with her co-worker Oso in March 2006, while still married to Ken. To keep the truth from Oso's wife, Ken offered to raise Christian as his own if Shawna stayed married to him. Shawna agreed to this arrangement. Later that summer, a woman approached Heather, Oso's wife, with surprising news. Shawna had given birth to Oso's baby. Heather was stunned and demanded answers from Oso when she got home. However, Oso lied to her, trying to conceal his affair with Shawna. But one night in December 2006, Heather caught Oso in the act. She waited up for him to return and confronted him as soon as he walked in. This time, Oso decided to be honest with Heather. He confessed to being out with Shawna that night and revealed that their affair had been going on for years. He also told her about Shawna's 2 pregnancies, including her recent birth of his son, Christian. Heather's husband Ignacio confessed to having an affair with Shawna, and Heather kicked him out of the house. However, the next day, she called him back because she didn't want to break up their family and wanted to keep their marriage intact. Heather told Ignacio she loved him and knew he loved her back, but she wasn't ready to forgive him immediately. Instead, she gave him several conditions to fulfill before considering taking him back. These conditions included getting an STD test, seeking counseling, giving up his parental rights to Shawna's baby, and ending his relationship with Shawna. Ignacio agreed to all the conditions and ended his affair with Shawna. However, Shawna was furious and began harassing Heather, even sending her a text message with a picture of her and Ignacio's son, saying, "Flesh and blood." Shawna threatened to sue Ignacio for child support, and her harassment became so bad that Ignacio and Heather had to take precautions to protect their family and property. They even had to get a lawyer to send Shawna a formal notice to stop harassing them. Despite the warnings, Shawna continued to harass Heather through text messages, emails, and voicemails. On January 23, 2007, Shawna, dressed in black, wore a Halloween mask and brandished a gun. She approached Heather as she left work and shot her twice in the head at point-blank range, execution style. Heather died at the scene, and Shawna was later caught and charged with her murder. Ignacio rushed to Heather's trauma room, only to be met by a doctor with devastating news: Heather had passed away. This shattered Ignacio, who now had to break the heart-wrenching news to their 9-year-old daughter, Victoria. Telling Victoria that her mother was gone was the most difficult task Ignacio had ever faced. He remembered spending a long time holding and comforting her as they both cried uncontrollably. Meanwhile, at the crime scene, witnesses were sharing their accounts of the murder with the police. One witness described the shooter as suddenly appearing and fleeing in a red pickup truck. Another thought the shooter might have been a woman, judging by the way they ran. The investigation had already raised one name in connection with Heather's harassment: Shawna Nelson, who was aware of Oso's affair. Shawna, a police dispatcher, was suspected of being involved in Heather's shooting. The police were familiar with her and her husband Ken, a police officer, and knew that Ken owned a car similar to the one driven by the shooter. As evidence mounted against Shawna, the police issued an all-points bulletin, APB, for her and the red pickup truck she was believed to be driving. Ken, who was on patrol that night, heard the APB on his radio and immediately started searching for his wife. Within 20 minutes, he found her driving his vehicle near their home. Shawna claimed she had been running errands, but Ken was suspicious because she wasn't wearing shoes despite the cold January weather in Colorado. What really caught Ken's attention, however, was that Shawna was wearing his socks, underwear, and pants. He stopped her, called for backup, and requested assistance. Soon, police officers arrived and took Shawna into custody. The authorities then began investigating to determine if she was involved in Heather's murder. Shawna's DNA was found on a pair of shoes discovered near the crime scene, about 1,000 feet away. Additionally, investigators found two .42 caliber Glock Model 22 shell casings in the parking lot where Heather was shot. This was significant because Ken, Shawna's partner, used the same type of gun for work. These findings strengthened the case against Shawna. A Halloween mask similar to the one worn by the shooter was found hidden under the seat of Ken's red pickup truck. At Shawna's home, investigators found a fully filled bathtub, which led some to suspect she was preparing to wash away any potential blood evidence. After Shawna's arrest, her clothing and hands were tested for gunshot residue. The results were positive, further implicating her in the crime. With strong evidence against her, Shawna was charged with first-degree murder. Although the shell casings matched the weapon used to kill Heather, the judge sentenced her appropriately. However, there was a surprising twist. Ken Nelson, Shawna's husband, handed over his service weapon to his supervisor, but the actual gun used in the murder was never found. Despite this, Ken was charged with tampering with evidence and being an accessory to first-degree murder because he stopped Shawna after the murder but failed to detain her. During her interrogation, Shawna claimed she had gone out to run errands and had accidentally put on her husband's dirty clothes from the laundry basket. She said that when she arrived at the store, she realized she had forgotten her wallet and drove back home. When questioned about Heather's murder, Shawna denied any involvement or knowledge of the crime. The police also extensively questioned Ignacio, but he was cleared of all suspicion. In February 2008, Shawna's trial began for Heather Garris's murder. Shawna pleaded not guilty to the charges. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Shawna had a history of affairs with married officers, including Ignacio. Shawna's motive for killing Heather Garris, according to the prosecution, was her obsession with Ignacio. A key witness in the case was Michelle Moore, Shawna's former best friend, who often accompanied her when she would publicly bully Heather Garris. In exchange for a lighter sentence, Michelle agreed to cooperate with the state and testify against Shawna. Michelle testified against Shawna, describing how much Shawna despised Heather Garris and even admitting to helping plan her murder. Shawna took the stand to defend herself, denying the allegations. She vehemently denied telling anyone that she fantasized about killing Heather or picturing her during target practice. Shawna also denied being involved in Heather's death, claiming she was on her way to a liquor store at the time of the shooting. During her testimony, she suggested an alternative theory, accusing her best friend Michelle of being obsessed with her and wanting to make her happy by eliminating Heather. However, when Michelle was questioned as a witness, she rejected Shawna's allegations. The prosecution argued that Shawna wore her husband's clothing during the shooting to frame him for the crime. According to the prosecution, by killing Heather, Shawna's husband's wife, and Ken, her own husband, Shawna and Ignacio would be free to be together. After deliberating for just 5 hours, the jury delivered a verdict. Shawna Nelson was guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sternly addressed Shawna, declaring that she deserved every day of her sentence. Shawna's former best friend, Michelle Moore, was sentenced to 9 years in prison for her role in planning Heather's murder. Following Shawna's conviction, Ken Nelson, her husband and a police officer, resigned from the force and filed for divorce. He moved out of state with their children, including Shawna's son Christian, whom she had with Ignacio. However, Ken later returned to Colorado, hoping that one day the children could visit Shawna in prison. Despite the circumstances, Ken always believed that Shawna was a loving and dedicated mother. The charges against him were eventually dropped. Heather's loved ones are relieved that Shawna is behind bars, feeling that justice has been served, and they hope she reflects on the pain she caused Heather every day for the rest of her life. Shawna's selfish behavior resulted in Heather being separated from her family, which meant Victoria, Heather's daughter, was deprived of her mother. Tragically, in 2015, 17-year-old Victoria died in a car accident when she lost control of her vehicle and hit a tree. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rossana Galliano. Rossana Galliano was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in the late 1970s. She was the youngest child, with 2 older brothers, Oscar and Gustavo, and a sister, Monica. Her parents were Raldo and Graciela. While details of her childhood and teenage years are scarce, it's known that she finished high school in the late 1990s. During this time, her father, Raldo, worked as a mechanic. In early 2001, Jose Arce visited Raldo's workshop, where he met Rossana. Born on November 22, 1948, Jose had spent over 30 years living abroad, including time in Greece and the United States, where he was imprisoned for 4 years for drug trafficking. He returned to Argentina in 1996, owning 8 properties in a posh area of Buenos Aires. Jose and Rossana started dating quickly after meeting at her father's shop, where he brought his vintage car for repairs. Despite their significant age difference, Jose appeared financially stable, thanks to his mother Elsa, who still lived in the United States. When 52-year-old Jose proposed to 22-year-old Rossana, her mother Graciela expressed concerns about their age difference. Jose argued that age was not an obstacle to love, and Graciela turned to Rossana for reassurance. Rossana confirmed her desire to marry him in a whisper. The couple got married on November 17, 2001, just 7 months after meeting. Jose attributed his cheerful, modern, and smart personality to winning Rossana over. They soon had a son named Gono, but problems began to emerge soon after. Jose was a controlling and jealous partner who frequently belittled Rossana and her family. The emotional abuse escalated into physical violence, leaving Rossana feeling trapped and terrified. Jose's intimidating presence, reinforced by his possession of 2 guns, allowed him to maintain control, a situation that Rossana's family was painfully aware of. He would often flaunt his guns when they had visitors, or when he visited others. On one occasion, Rosanna's brother Oscar witnessed Jose physically assaulting her while they were painting their house, telling her to shut up before hitting her. Another time, Rosanna's father noticed bruises on her back, and she revealed that Jose had dragged her across the pavement. Despite these challenges, Rosanna and Jose had their second child, and Rosanna tried to make the relationship work, hoping to provide a stable home for their children. However, her efforts were consistently thwarted by Jose's temper and disrespectful behavior. Moreover, Jose's mother Elsa exerted control over their household from a distance, making decisions about their lives during her brief visits to Argentina. By 2006, Rosanna had reached her breaking point after enduring years of unbearable abuse, and she finally found the courage to report Jose for domestic violence. Her family, however, remained largely oblivious to the full extent of her suffering. Months later, Rosanna filed a second complaint, which included a request for a medical examination to document her injuries. It was then that she confided in her sister Monica, and the two made a pact to stay in close contact, reaching out to each other whenever something happened. Monica became Rosanna's safe haven and primary source of support, providing a refuge from the unbearable realities of life with Jose. Rosanna would often visit Monica's apartment with her children, though Jose would dictate when they had to return, frequently backing up his demands with death threats. Rosanna made the difficult decision to move in with Monica and the children, leaving Jose to stay in his own home. After a period of time, Rosanna took further action by filing another complaint and seeking a divorce, which resulted in a restraining order being issued against Jose. From then on, the only times they met were during child visitation sessions at a neutral location in El Romanzo Exal de la Cruz, as arranged by the court. Rosanna confided in her neighbor, Daniel Gonzalez, a married father of one who worked as a gardener. Rumors began to circulate about a possible romantic relationship between Rosanna and Daniel, although this was never confirmed. Meanwhile, Jose's threats persisted, and Rosanna shared a chilling voicemail with her brother Oscar, in which Jose casually spoke about killing her in mid-2007 while socializing with friends at a bar. Rosanna met Oscar Lugo, a 32-year-old man from Marino who worked in a sewing workshop. They quickly became close, exchanging phone numbers and starting a romantic relationship. Oscar was an old-fashioned gentleman who treated Rosanna with kindness, attention, and listened to her, which was a welcome change after all the turmoil she had faced. By December 2007, Oscar had become a part of Rosanna's holiday celebrations, even dressing up as Santa Claus to delight her two sons. However, their happiness was threatened by Jose, who was keeping a close eye on Rosanna's every move and was aware of her new relationship. The looming divorce had panicked him. Jose tried to persuade Rosanna to end things with Oscar by offering her a truck, but she refused. When Rosanna had a severe nervous breakdown, it was Oscar who accompanied her to the hospital, not Jose. Running out of options, Jose, with the help of his mother Elsa, concocted a plan to hire a hitman, whose identity remains unknown. On January 16, 2008, Rosanna and her sister Monica went to El Rano to pick up her sons, aged 4 and 3. However, Jose delayed the handover, making excuses. At 9:15 p.m., Jose called Rosanna, claiming that Geronimo had a fever and that he would take him to the hospital and return him the next day. But Rosanna insisted on taking care of Geronimo herself and asked for the children to be returned. The call was brief, and Rosanna then went back inside. Around 10 p.m., Rosanna sent Oscar Lugo a casual text about their plans for the next day. Later, at 10:50 p.m., Rosanna and Monica sat down for dinner when Jose called again, unleashing a deadly trap. Rosanna stepped out into the garden to improve the reception, but a shadowy figure emerged from behind the trees and shot her 4 times with a .45 caliber gun. Monica, hearing the shots, screamed as Rosanna staggered and fell. Panicked, Monica tried calling 911, but the call wouldn't go through. She then asked her boyfriend to alert the police. Meanwhile, Oscar Lugo, oblivious to the events, attempted to contact Rosanna at 11 p.m., but got no response. He then tried to reach Monica, but she didn't answer. The police investigation revealed that the shooter had entered from an adjacent vacant lot. A witness reported seeing someone fleeing through a gap in the fence, but couldn't provide a clear description due to the darkness. Jose was left stunned after being questioned and subsequently requested a lawyer to take over the proceedings before departing the following day. Meanwhile, a red sweater was discovered during further searches, which Rosanna's relatives identified as belonging to Jose, solidifying his position as the prime suspect in their minds. The case garnered widespread media attention, sending shockwaves throughout the country and sparking a scandal as Jose and his mother publicly proclaimed his innocence, while also making disparaging remarks about Rosanna and suggesting that her multiple lovers should be investigated instead. After the incident, Daniel the gardener became reclusive, shunning all human contact. On the night of Rosanna's funeral, Raldo observed Jose lurking in the distance, watching from his truck without offering condolences or joining the mourners. Jose's defense strategy later focused on discrediting Monica, Rosanna's sister, and the sole witness by raising questions about her behavior, such as why her clothes bore no blood stains and why she had prioritized calling for help over assisting her sister. However, this theory lacked credibility, and the investigators countered that the murder weapon was too heavy for a woman to wield. The detectives also highlighted a crucial point. Anyone familiar with the house would know that Rosanna had to venture outside to get a cell signal, suggesting a high degree of premeditation in the crime. During the investigation, Rosanna's sons were cared for by their father and grandmother Elsa, while their grandmother Graciela was granted limited access. In contrast, Monica and Oscar were denied access, with Jose citing safety concerns for his sons, despite the legal restrictions. The children longed to see their Aunt Monica, prompting Jose to occasionally allow supervised visits. Monica seized these opportunities to take the children to see a psychologist. Eventually, Graciela successfully obtained visitation rights, although she was denied guardianship. In a contemporaneous interview, Jose claimed that Rosanna had 4 lovers, all of whom had criminal records. According to Jose, Rosanna engaged in intimate relationships with these men to uncover their secrets, which she then leveraged to blackmail them for personal gain. Meanwhile, following threats, Oscar was placed under police protection as a protected witness in his sister's case, requiring him to wear a tracking bracelet. As 2007 drew to a close, investigators still lacked concrete evidence to bring charges against any of the suspects. However, a significant breakthrough came a year after the murder, when Jose was arrested in January 2008, charged with aggravated homicide due to their romantic relationship, premeditation, and the alleged involvement of multiple perpetrators. 4 years after the attack, Oscar exercised his visitation rights to take his nephews to play soccer, sharing a heartwarming hug with the 6- and 7-year-old boys. In April 2013, the trial commenced. Jose maintained his innocence during the May proceedings, but the trial was delayed when he suffered a stroke, ultimately pushing the final verdict to November 2013. The judges concluded that the murder was meticulously planned, bearing the hallmarks of organized crime. Jose and Elsa were found to have chosen the time and place for the attack, aware that a phone call would lure Rosanna outside, rendering her vulnerable. The court determined that financial motives drove the murder, as Jose sought to avoid splitting the marital assets. Jose and Elsa received life imprisonment sentences. The higher court upheld the conviction, citing Jose's threats, the domestic violence endured by Rosanna, and the dominant influence of his mother. The actual perpetrators of the shooting were never identified. In 2015, Jose and Elsa were placed under house arrest, with Jose's health and Elsa's age cited as reasons, allowing the children to reunite with them. The media continued to follow the children's story for years, during which Monica and Graciela had no contact with them. The boys were shuffled between homes familiar to their father, but unknown to Rosanna's family. In January 2017, the court granted the children a weekend visit with their maternal grandparents for the first time. The Galliano family prepared their home with fresh paint, a thorough cleaning, and decorations, and Graciela cooked their favorite dish. That weekend, the Galliano home was filled with joy as the boys played soccer, video games, and even asked to sleep in their grandmother's bed, whom they hadn't seen in over 2 years. On November 24, 2018, Jose passed away after another stroke. The event was another devastating blow for the children, who attended their father's funeral. During the funeral, they expressed their concerns about their future to their Aunt Monica, who reassured them with calmness and love, promising to support whatever they decided. They chose to live with Monica, who then had to confront Elsa to communicate the boys' decision. Through these and many other instances, it was clear that Monica always prioritized her nephew's wishes, whether they wanted to talk or preferred silence. Monica's primary goal was to provide stability and comfort for the boys. In March 2019, Shawna decided against switching schools, opting to stay close to his friends and see out his final 2 years. He returned to live with his grandmother, Elsa. Meanwhile, Monica pursued custody of Nahuan. Things appeared to be settling, but tragedy struck in late November 2019 when 87-year-old Elsa was hospitalized and shortly after passed away on November 30th. The following month, Monica was awarded custody of Nahuan. By the end of the year, Jono had moved in with a family friend of his grandmother's. Both brothers still required psychological support to cope with their traumatic experiences, with Jono grappling with depression. Their psychologist acknowledged the staggering sequence of events they had endured. In March 2020, Jono's housemate passed away, prompting him to take refuge with his Aunt Monica until October of that year. When he turned 18, Geronimo rented a small apartment and began living independently, supported by the income generated from his inherited properties. Meanwhile, Monica initiated legal proceedings to secure their inheritance, fearing they might be stripped of their assets. Nahuan, on the other hand, demonstrated emotional stability thanks to the support he received, and was encouraged to continue attending therapy as needed. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kate Waring. Kate Waring was born in Charleston, South Carolina, into a loving family with 2 siblings and parents who worked hard to provide the best possible life for their children. From a young age, Kate demonstrated a deep love for animals, which led her to volunteer at various animal shelters during her teenage years. Apart from her compassion for animals, Kate was also an accomplished dancer with a wide circle of friends and a radiant personality. To all appearances, Kate grew up in a supportive and nurturing environment, and in many ways, this was true. However, Kate's life took a dramatic turn just before she went off to college. In a private conversation with her parents, Kate revealed that she had been abused by someone close to the family when she was younger. Although she chose not to disclose the identity of the perpetrator, her revelation sent shockwaves through her family. Her parents were unaware of the trauma Kate had been silently enduring for years, leaving them reeling from the news. After sharing her dark secret, Kate's parents did everything in their power to support her, but the trauma's consequences only seemed to intensify over time. Initially, Kate struggled with addiction, first with alcohol and later with illegal substances. Her parents suggested therapy, which she reluctantly agreed to. They also encouraged her to move back home, hoping the family's presence would help her cope. Despite being an independent adult, Kate agreed to return home. At first, therapy seemed to be having a positive impact, but Kate struggled to break free from the past's heavy burden and live life to the fullest. The psychiatrist diagnosed her with depression, but everything changed when her father, always concerned and eager to help, suggested a trip to anywhere she desired. Kate was thrilled by the idea and soon set her heart on traveling beyond the Arctic Circle. Her dream was to witness polar bears in their natural habitat, and despite her traumatic experience, her love for animals remained unwavering. Kate and her parents searched for the perfect tour and soon purchased tickets for a trip to the Arctic Circle. Kate was thrilled to be embarking on this adventure, and as a result, her parents witnessed a significant transformation in her demeanor, replacing her depressive state with a cheerful and optimistic outlook. When they finally embarked on the trip, Kate was ecstatic. During the journey, Kate and her parents had a fantastic time on the boat, which took them to the Arctic Circle, where Kate befriended a Russian tourist. They remained in contact throughout the trip and continued exchanging letters afterward. Kate developed strong feelings for him, and eventually, after returning home, she decided to visit Russia. Upon arriving, they reunited, and she even contemplated staying longer in the country, but due to visa problems, Kate was forced to return home. Despite this setback, it seemed that Kate had finally overcome her depression. Back home, she planned to resolve her visa issues and even started writing a book for her children. Her life was finally taking a turn for the better. On Saturday, June 12, 2009, Kate's life took a dramatic turn. Her family was away on a business trip, leaving her alone at home. Normally, Kate would call her father to reassure him that everything was okay, but this time, she failed to do so. Her concerned father tried calling her back, but there was no response. Given Kate's past struggles with alcohol and substance abuse, he asked someone to check on her at home. When the person arrived, Kate was nowhere to be found, but her bedroom light was still on, suggesting she might return soon. However, she didn't show up. Furthermore, Kate had left behind her essential medication, which she was supposed to take regularly. Despite their growing anxiety, Kate's parents decided not to panic and waited for her return, considering her age of 28 and ability to take care of herself. Her father decided to wait until Monday before involving the police. On Monday morning, Kate Waring's father received a call from the bank. A bank employee informed him that someone had tried to cash a check worth more than $4,000, supposedly signed by Kate. However, the bank couldn't get in touch with Kate directly, and as her father was a co-signer on her account, they reached out to him instead. The situation seemed highly unusual because Kate's father was certain that his daughter only had a few $100s in her account, which is why the bank's security team contacted him. However, Kate's signature on the check appeared genuine. They also provided the name of the man who had brought in the check, Ethan Mack. The father did not recognize him, but since the bank authenticated Kate's signature, he assumed the man was an acquaintance of his daughter. Nevertheless, he decided to contact the police, as Kate remained unreachable. The detectives began investigating Kate's disappearance, and Ethan Mack was their first point of inquiry. He claimed to have known Kate for years and stated that she had written the check to settle old debts. According to Ethan, he frequently provided Kate with money for clothing, jewelry, and other purchases. Conversations with Kate's friends revealed that she had been friends with Ethan for an extended period, although they indicated that their relationship had never been romantic in nature, despite being close. Ethan claimed that he and Kate met on Friday night and dined at a restaurant together. Afterwards, he drove her home and went about his own business. He even produced correspondence with Kate, which corroborated his account of their dinner. Ethan allowed the detectives to search his house, where he lived with his mother, as well as his car. Although the search yielded nothing suspicious, the police still found the situation surrounding the check to be peculiar and were not quick to dismiss him as a suspect. Ethan eventually called the police station, demanding to be left alone. The police worked to reconstruct the timeline of the Friday night Kate was last seen. She had met with her therapist that afternoon, followed by a trip to the gym. Later, she entered a store, purchasing a bottle of wine. Security cameras captured her on the phone at that time, possibly speaking with Ethan, who later picked her up and they headed to a restaurant. Kate's parents remembered another unsettling detail. On the day she vanished, Kate had mentioned having some problems, but refused to elaborate. Her parents didn't recall this conversation until days later. Unfortunately, this information didn't aid the search, as weeks passed and Kate remained missing. Her parents felt the police weren't doing enough, given Kate's troubled past. However, in August, the case gained new life when a group of former police officers, led by lawyer Andy Savage, took it up. This group had been privately investigating unresolved cases, and Kate Waring's case had caught their attention. The team of 5 individuals, all with extensive police experience, began investigating Kate's disappearance. Former detective James Randall was the first to examine Kate's bedroom, where he found 2 suspicious elements. The first was a packet of medication that Kate regularly took, which was concerning because her parents confirmed she would never intentionally stop taking it. Therefore, the fact that the packet was left at home was alarming. The second suspicious element was Chinese currency on Kate's bed, which was peculiar because her parents had no idea where she had obtained it or why she needed it. The team then involved Bobby Mitter, an expert in gathering online information about individuals and tracking them. His skills proved invaluable, and he quickly discovered that on the night of her disappearance, around 10 p.m., Kate had called her friend James, who did not answer the phone. Instead, she left him a very troubling voicemail, claiming someone had stolen her credit cards. The investigation also revealed that her phone was last active at 1:53 a.m., when for some reason, she called her own voicemail. Further investigation led team member Lewis to discover that the call was made from the area of James Island, which was a few kilometers from Kate's house. Another team member, former homicide detective Eugene Fraser, made an intriguing discovery. He spoke with several acquaintances living in James Island and found it odd that Ethan Mack, who had voluntarily let the police inspect his home, did not actually live there. Instead, he rented an apartment in a nearby building, which Eugene was fortunate to uncover because one of his acquaintances happened to be the landlord of the apartment Ethan had rented. Digging deeper, the detectives discovered that the police had barely scratched the surface in their investigation into Ethan. A cursory search of his mother's house was all they had done. The team decided to take matters into their own hands and uncovered a vital lead. Ethan had a girlfriend, Heather Camp. When they questioned Kate's parents about her, her mother recalled a peculiar encounter. Kate had met Heather on a train from Washington, D.C., about a month before her disappearance, when Kate was having issues with her Russian visa. Heather claimed her wallet had been stolen, leaving her penniless, and Kate sympathetically offered to lend her a substantial amount of money. Heather stated she had landed a pediatric surgeon position in South Carolina, set to start soon. Later, she announced her daughter had died in a New Jersey car crash, but her behavior was eerily calm, suggesting the news hadn't greatly affected her. The detectives also stumbled upon an intriguing fact. Heather was facing a fraud charge in Indiana for posing as a licensed doctor by falsifying documents. This new evidence forced them to re-examine the case from a different angle. They presented their findings to the police, but the authorities were surprisingly uncooperative and unwilling to continue the investigation. The team understood that the only way to get the police to take action was to gather irrefutable proof that linked Heather to Kate's disappearance. To achieve this, the team went to great lengths. They convinced the person who rented the apartment to Ethan Mack to install a secret camera outside his apartment door. Additionally, they placed a hidden GPS tracker in Ethan's car, enabling the team to track his movements and observe his activities. It didn't take long to yield results. After analyzing Ethan's travel patterns, the detectives found that he had visited numerous pawn shops across the city, selling small batches of various jewelry pieces. Although they couldn't confirm whether the jewelry belonged to Kate, the detectives believed they were getting close to a vital clue. After some time, Ethan and Heather faced a serious problem when their landlord threatened to evict them due to non-payment of rent. The team knew that if this happened, they would lose the opportunity to observe the couple's behavior and movements. To prevent this, they tried to persuade the landlord to change his mind. At the same time, the detectives quickly came up with a new plan. They asked the landlord to give Ethan and Heather more time to pay the rent, but only if they agreed to sign a contract promising to clear the debt. The strategy worked, and as soon as the landlord handed over the contract, the team sent it to the laboratory. The goal was to compare Ethan and Heather's handwriting on the contract with Kate's signature on the $4,000 check. This led to a significant breakthrough. The handwriting expert conclusively confirmed that the check signature was from the same person who had signed Heather's name on the contract, proving that Heather had forged Kate's signature. The team knew the police would be slow to act, so they came up with a new plan. They persuaded the landlord to cooperate and told Ethan that his apartment needed to be treated for insects. The team leader wore an exterminator suit and went to the apartment with the landlord. They waited until Ethan left the apartment, confirmed by his car moving away from the house, before entering. However, they were met with an unwelcome surprise. Ethan was still at home. It turned out Heather was driving his car, but it was too late to abort the operation. The investigator had to improvise, insisting that fumigation was necessary and asking Ethan to wait outside while the chemicals were sprayed. Ethan, none the wiser, agreed and left. Meanwhile, the investigator carefully searched the apartment for any evidence linking Ethan to Kate's disappearance. He searched Ethan's backpack and found Chinese money, the same notes found on Kate's bed. This was their first clue. Unfortunately, no other potential clues were found. The investigator and landlord pretended to finish the treatment and left. The team needed to regroup and devise another plan. Upon reviewing the footage from the camera in front of Ethan's apartment, detectives identified a frequent visitor, Terry Williams, a neighbor of the couple. They suspected Williams might have information about Ethan and Heather's involvement in Kate's disappearance, so they took a bold step. The team offered Williams a substantial sum of money in exchange for information about his friend's actions regarding Kate. They brought the money to Williams's apartment, but were met with an unexpected turn of events. At the time of the offer, Heather was at her home, where she overheard the entire conversation. Apparently, there was a prior discussion between Ethan and Williams. When the detective approached Williams, Heather panicked. She frantically called Ethan, explaining the situation. The investigation team was caught off guard and spent the following days struggling to determine their next move. In a shocking turn of events, Williams unexpectedly reached out to the detectives and asked them to come to his home to talk. When the detectives arrived at his apartment, Williams was surprisingly open and honest. He told them that although Ethan and Heather hadn't directly confided in him, he had had his suspicions about their involvement in Kate's disappearance. Williams then handed over an iPod he had received from Heather shortly after Kate went missing, which he had assumed belonged to Kate. The detectives analyzed the iPod and were able to trace its ownership to Kate using its serial number. This discovery provided the final piece of evidence needed to reopen the case. This time, the authorities couldn't ignore the evidence and finally arrested Ethan and Heather. During the initial interrogation, Heather agreed to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for a lighter sentence. She claimed Kate's body was located on Watala Island, approximately 20 miles from her residence. A police search team scoured the area all day, but failed to find Kate's body. It became apparent that Heather had deliberately misled them. Andy Savage decided to employ a new tactic. Recognizing that Heather was likely directly involved in Kate's murder, he met with her and promised to help. Andy offered her a deal. In exchange for revealing the exact location of Kate's body, he would assist in getting her off the forgery charges. Heather, believing it was her only chance, agreed. She provided a detailed description of the location, indicating that Kate's body was still on the outskirts of Watala Island. The detectives, minus the police, decided to investigate the location without alerting the authorities. However, they faced disappointment and did not find Kate's body. The next day, they returned and made a discovery. They found the remains of the young woman. Although the forensic doctors could not determine the cause of death, the perpetrator soon began to confess. In August 2009, Heather signed a confession for murder, obstruction of justice, and bank check forgery. It was discovered that she had been committing fraud for years and had targeted Kate as her next victim during a trip from Washington. Later, she met Ethan and began a relationship with him. Ethan's trial began in October 2010, during which the prosecution presented Heather's testimony to reconstruct the events surrounding Kate's disappearance. According to Heather, on the day Kate vanished, Kate discovered that Heather had deceived her and stolen her credit cards. Kate threatened to inform her father, which would likely lead to police involvement. Heather confided in Ethan, who sided with her despite his long-standing friendship with Kate. The investigation revealed that Kate was not alone with Ethan that night. Heather was also present. It appears that the pair attempted to negotiate with Kate at the restaurant to prevent her from exposing the deception. Heather may have promised to return the stolen credit cards and money, which were at Ethan's apartment when the three arrived. The court questioned Heather's account and ultimately sentenced her to 39 years in prison. Ethan received a slightly lighter sentence of 25 years, largely due to Heather also being charged with fraud. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Shawna Berry. Shawna Berry was born on August 26, 1983, and grew up to be a happy and friendly person with a large social circle and a love for parties. During her school days, she was an active member of the local cheerleading team. After completing high school, Shawna enrolled at East Tennessee State University to pursue a degree in psychology and criminology. It was during this period that she met Jason White, and they began dating. The couple got engaged just before graduating in late 2004. At the age of 21, Shawna decided to pursue a master's degree in psychology, which led her to temporarily relocate to Knoxville for her studies. While in Knoxville, she worked part-time at a children's educational center, where she discovered her passion for helping kids. Meanwhile, Shawna's fiancé, Jason, was studying law in a different state. Despite the distance, they remained close and began planning their wedding in Knoxville. Initially, Shawna stayed with her friend Jason Amami, who had also attended college with her and later moved to Knoxville. They shared a 2-bedroom apartment, and Jason allowed Shawna to stay there until she found her own place to live. Shawna had 2 part-time jobs, one at a jewelry store and the other at a children's hospital. On the Sunday night of December 5th, after finishing her shift at the jewelry store, Shawna went to the mall to do some Christmas shopping. Later, she returned home and spent her evening wrapping presents for the children at the educational center, chatting with her neighbor, and then retreating to her room. Before going to bed, she had a phone conversation with her boyfriend. Around 4 in the morning, Jason Amami was awoken by a scream from a woman. At first, he thought Shawna was having a nightmare, so he went to her room to check on her. However, he was shocked to find a stranger wielding a knife. The intruder attacked Jason, and they engaged in a fierce struggle. Eventually, Jason managed to fend off the attacker and made a dash for the door. He rushed out of the apartment and ran to the nearest convenience store, almost a kilometer away, to call for help. When the store clerk saw Jason, who was covered in blood, they immediately called 911. Jason explained to the police what had happened when they arrived at the scene. At their apartment, the police found Shawna lying in the hallway that connected 5 apartments. She was still alive, but barely conscious. When the police questioned her about the attacker, she could only provide weak clues. The police searched the entire building and the surrounding area, but were unable to find the attacker. They rushed Shawna to the nearest hospital, where despite the doctor's best efforts, they were unable to save her. The doctor reported that she had suffered more than 20 stab wounds, making survival highly unlikely. Jason had 8 wounds from the attacker. Although only one was critical, he received medical attention and his life was no longer in danger. Meanwhile, the detectives began investigating the crime scene. They discovered blood in the hallway, indicating that Shawna had attempted to seek help from her neighbors, but none of them had opened their doors. Next to Shawna's room, the detectives found the murder weapon, a kitchen knife that belonged to Jason, which the attacker had used with such force that it became bent and damaged. The police discovered blood near the back door of the apartment and on the stairs leading to the street. As Jason and Shawna had exited through the front door, detectives believed the killer likely escaped through the back door in Jason's room. Another clue was found, a partial footprint, possibly left by the attacker when they followed Jason and attacked him. The brutal nature of Shawna's murder led police to suspect a personal motive. Initial investigations focused on Shawna's boyfriend, despite him being approximately 1,000 kilometers away from Knoxville. However, friends and family testified to their wonderful relationship, and he had no apparent reason to commit such a heinous crime. He learned of Shawna's death when her mother called him at 10 a.m. and claimed to have fainted and taken a long time to recover. In his incapacitated state, he required a neighbor's assistance to book a plane ticket and pack his suitcase. After carefully verifying his alibi, investigators concluded he couldn't have physically traveled to Knoxville and back by morning, thus ruling him out as a suspect and shifting their attention to Shawna's neighbor. In contrast to Shawna's boyfriend, who had a solid alibi, this particular neighbor did not, which raised suspicions that he might be the perpetrator. Many friends and family members of Shawna suspected him, with some believing he could be the killer, and others accusing him of leaving Shawna behind as he fled the apartment. The suspicion was so deep-seated that Shawna's parents didn't even want him to attend her funeral. After Jason was released from the hospital, investigators started questioning him. He maintained his original story, stating that he had heard screams, seen an unfamiliar man, and was attacked after successfully fighting off the attacker. Jason rushed to the front door, went out into the street, and sought help from the neighbors. He thought Shawna had also escaped from the apartment because he could no longer hear her screams. However, the police had doubts about the truth of this testimony. Doubts about Jason initially stemmed from his injuries. Although he had 8 wounds, 7 were superficial, and the 8th on his right arm could have been sustained while either defending himself or attacking someone. Furthermore, the absence of forced entry into the apartment suggested that the assailant might have already been inside. Jason claimed to have taken out the trash through the back door that night, but he couldn't recall whether he had locked it. The detectives pressed him further, focusing on which door he used to exit the apartment onto the street. Jason maintained that he had left through the front door, but the police suspected he was lying. If Jason had actually exited through the back door, it would account for the bloodstains near the door leading to the stairs, thereby heightening suspicions against him. Additionally, the police accused him of using and selling illegal drugs and of becoming aggressive when he couldn't get his fix. Jason denied all these allegations, but the investigators continued to level various charges against him. After spending several hours at the police station, the detectives asked Jason to take a polygraph test, and to their surprise, he accepted. An expert was brought in to administer the test, during which Jason was asked a series of leading questions. When the test was over, the investigators told him that he had failed, suggesting that his responses were false. This news caused Jason to become extremely upset, shouting that he was innocent and had no involvement in the crime, that his life was in danger, and that the real perpetrator was still at large. Despite his protests, the detectives remained skeptical. Police couldn't charge Jason due to lack of evidence. Lab analysis of the murder weapon revealed 3 DNA samples, the victims, Jason's, and an unknown man's. The unknown DNA was also found elsewhere in the apartment. A bloody fingerprint on the knife handle didn't match Jason's. These findings suggested another person was present, but the unknown DNA didn't match any in the database. Despite this, public opinion still doubted Jason's innocence. Jason developed PTSD after a flawed polygraph test led to false accusations. In reality, Jason had severe lung and neck injuries with little hope of recovery. However, due to police report inaccuracies, his treatment was only 25% covered, leaving him in financial distress. After the police stopped suspecting him, they started questioning Jason as a witness. Based on his account, they managed to create a rough description of the attacker. However, the situation was complicated by the fact that Jason didn't get a clear look at the assailant's face. The apartment was dimly lit, and the attacker had pounced on him as soon as he left the room. In Johnny's room, the investigators made an intriguing discovery. A cap was found near the back staircase, along with discs and a stereo player. At first, they thought these items might belong to Johnny or Jason, but Jason denied any connection to them, claiming they were not in his apartment. This led the investigators to suspect that the killer might have left them behind. The police released a rough sketch of the suspect to the media, and after it was published, they received hundreds of leads. Many people reported individuals who vaguely matched the sketch, prompting the detectives to investigate each of these leads. One lead in particular caught their attention: a group of local teenagers known to break into houses to steal. One of these teenagers, 19-year-old Michael, bore a resemblance to the suspect's sketch. The police launched a search for Michael, which was made more complicated by the fact that he was already wanted for theft. With the possibility of his involvement in murder, 2 police units joined the search for Michael. They tracked down Michael and brought him in for questioning about the murder. As soon as he was in custody, the investigators turned their attention to his shoes, which had a tread pattern that was similar to the footprint found at the crime scene. They took DNA and fingerprint samples from Michael and sent them to the lab for analysis. While waiting for the results, they questioned him, and he made a surprising confession. Michael claimed that he and a friend had broken into Gia's apartment that night, intending to steal valuables. However, he said his friend had taken a knife and attacked Gia. But the detectives soon grew suspicious of Michael's story. The details he provided didn't match the evidence they had collected, and there was no sign of 2 strangers at the crime scene. The lab results only added to their doubts. Michael's DNA and fingerprints didn't match those found at the murder scene, and his shoes didn't match the tread pattern found in Gia's room. In the end, the police concluded that Michael had made up the whole story. It may seem strange, but it's not uncommon for people to falsely confess to high-profile crimes, often to get attention or a reward. It's unclear what motivated Michael, but his confession turned out to be completely false. Following the murder, investigators questioned over 1,000 potential suspects and collected around 400 DNA samples. However, none of them matched the evidence found at the crime scene. In an effort to encourage people to come forward with information, a reward was offered early on in the investigation. As time went on, the reward amount increased each month. By December 2005, a year after the murder, the reward had reached $60,000. The state governor also contributed an additional $20,000 from his own funds, drawing even more public attention to the case. Despite the many leads, all of them ultimately led to dead ends. As a result, the case remained unsolved for several years. In 2007, the victim's parents took action seeking changes in state legislation. They found it surprising that the murderer's fingerprints and DNA were not in any databases, considering the brutality of the crime. The parents refused to believe that this was the perpetrator's first offense. They later discovered that, according to Tennessee laws, fingerprints and DNA samples were only collected from people who had been convicted of a crime. Jason's parents were determined to bring about change. They took an active role in shaping a new law that required the collection of DNA samples from all individuals arrested for violent crimes. The authorities backed this initiative, and the law was passed in May 2007. 2 months later, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. The police arrested 22-year-old Taylor Lee Olson for violating his probation terms. Olson had a lengthy criminal record, mainly involving theft, check forgery, and auto theft, with multiple previous arrests. Remarkably, despite his history of run-ins with the law, his fingerprints and DNA had never been collected. Olson lived with his girlfriend and their newborn daughter, but his criminal activities persisted. It was revealed that Olson had already come to the investigators' attention 5 months earlier when they received a tip about his possible involvement in the murder. However, for reasons unknown, the police had not pursued DNA samples for analysis at that time. Nevertheless, with his new arrest for probation violation, they finally decided to question him about Johnny's case. Olson eventually confessed his involvement in the murder and willingly provided a DNA sample. When the lab results came in, it was confirmed that Taylor's DNA was a complete match with the sample found in the victim's apartment. Following this, they collected his fingerprints, which also matched the fingerprint on the murder weapon. Olson was subsequently arrested, and detectives began to question him. Initially, Olson said he was not guilty, but he eventually decided to confess to his actions. Taylor claimed that on that night he had intended to steal Johnny's car and had entered her apartment through the back door to find the car keys. When he entered her room, she woke up and began screaming. In response, Olson grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times. However, he insisted that he hadn't intended to kill anyone and that it had all occurred accidentally. Detectives had doubts about the truthfulness of some details and leaned towards believing that Taylor had premeditated the murder. It was possible that he had been stalking the victim for some time, indirectly supported by the fact that Johnny's friends had reported someone following her in a car at the time. No evidence was found to substantiate this, but after Olson's arrest, it seemed increasingly plausible. Despite this, there was little doubt about his culpability, as his DNA and fingerprints were present on the murder weapon, strongly indicating his involvement. Olson's trial was slated to commence in mid-2008, and by that point, he had already retained a lawyer. Apparently, his legal counsel advised him to retract his confession, and Taylor presented a new version of events to the detectives. Now, he claimed that he had entered Johnny's apartment with his friend named Noah Cox. According to this revised account, when Olson entered Gia's room to retrieve the car keys, she allegedly woke up, seized a knife, and stabbed him several times. Olson then fled through the back door, while his friend entered Gia's room, disarmed her, and killed her. This new narrative raised suspicions among the police, as they found no fingerprints or DNA from other individuals at the crime scene, making it appear unlikely that anyone else was involved. Detectives awaited the start of the trial, but it never occurred. On March 28, 2008, Taylor Olson took his own life in his prison cell. Alongside him, several suicide notes were discovered, addressed to his family, Joan, his relatives, and the police. In the note to the detectives, he once again alleged that his friend Noah Cox was the actual perpetrator and also apologized to Gia's family and his own. Detectives continued to believe that Olson was responsible for the murder and repeatedly questioned him, but they found no evidence implicating him. Gia's parents also remained skeptical, believing that Olson was lying. In their view, if Taylor was truly innocent, he wouldn't have taken his own life. It seemed more likely that he simply did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Furthermore, for several months following his initial confession, Olson had consistently maintained that he had entered the apartment alone and that there was no one else with him. The sudden change in his story to shift blame onto his friend raised further doubts. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Blumel family. Roger Blumel, born January 17, 1965, was raised in a big, close-knit family with strong values. Even in high school, he was driven and ambitious. He worked in transportation and later discovered his talent in sales, where he excelled. Friends say he could sell anything to anyone, thanks to his kind, cheerful personality. He was always happy and loved making others smile. Roger enjoyed a fulfilling life and a strong bond with his family, but something was missing: a life partner. That all changed one day when he met the right person. Although the details of their meeting are unclear, a close friend recalled that Roger was immediately smitten with a young woman and confidently declared his intention to marry her by the end of the evening. The woman who caught his attention was Melissa. Born on January 1, 1960, in Wichita, Melissa grew up in a loving family of 6 siblings, although she tragically lost a younger sister in infancy. Melissa was a kind, diligent, and helpful person who always put others before herself. She started her career as a bank cashier and worked her way up the ranks, earning promotions through her dedication, teamwork, and strong work ethic. Her career was marked by success, ultimately leading to her appointment as vice president of the bank. The first meeting of Roger and Melissa marked the start of a lifelong partnership between 2 kindred spirits, who tied the knot in 1991. On the surface, the Blumels seemed to have it all. Melissa's rapid rise through the banking ranks, while Roger's charisma enabled him to successfully launch his own business venture. With a natural talent for bringing people together, Roger thrived on sharing good times with friends and spreading joy to those around him. In Melissa, he had found the ideal partner to share in his adventures. What's more, the couple's strong sense of social responsibility drove them to participate in and contribute to various charitable, sporting, and community-driven initiatives in their locality. The Blumel had an idyllic life, but it lacked one thing: a child to bring laughter and joy. After years of trying to conceive, they decided to adopt. A social worker introduced them to Kesha, who was putting her 2 sons, Tony and Chris, up for adoption. The Blumel wanted a closed adoption, but Kesha preferred open. In the end, the Blumel approach won, and Tony and Chris became part of their family, starting a new life. Tony was amazed by daily dinners. The kids quickly adapted, thriving in elementary school and beyond. They excelled in high school, making diverse friends and starring in sports like wrestling and football. Tony's wrestling prowess earned him 2nd place in a division competition, promising a bright future for the family. Tony's family life took a drastic turn for the worse during his senior year of high school. Until then, he had been a model child, but suddenly he became rebellious and constantly clashed with his parents, resentful that they favored his younger brother, Chris. He started drinking, breaking curfews, and even smoking marijuana, causing chaos at home and making it seem like all hope was lost for him to get back on track. Tony had always dreamed of joining the United States Air Force after graduating, but his new behavior ruined his chances. In 2013, he was arrested for a violent offense, and then again for driving under the influence, which meant his records would prevent him from pursuing a career in military aviation. Tony's life spun out of control after these events, lacking direction after high school. He shunned education and jobs, preferring to sleep in and get high on cannabis. Melissa lived in fear of his violent outbursts, and there was another secret the family didn't know. Since 2013, Kesha contacted her biological sons on social media. Tony was excited to reconnect, but Chris seemed unreceptive. Kesha was devastated after giving them up, relieved they were with a good family together. Reconnecting with Tony thrilled her, but she resented the family for allegedly turning Chris against her. Moreover, when Kesha learned about Tony's troubles with his adoptive parents, she saw an opportunity to reconnect with her son and swiftly extended an invitation for him to visit her. At the adoptive home, things worsened. Tony's rage boiled over, and he punched a hole in the wall. This was the last straw. The family realized they and Chris were no longer safe. After failed attempts to address Tony's behavior, Roger and Melissa made the tough decision to ask him to leave. He started by wandering aimlessly, but he soon understood he needed to take action to support himself financially. He got jobs at fast food restaurants, and, to make some extra money, he also sold cannabis. Despite having no fixed address and sleeping at different friends' houses each night, he eventually fell in with a group of young people who were heavily into drug abuse. Among the midst of despairing events, a lifeline emerged for Tony when Kesha extended an invitation for him to move to California and live with her. Tony seized the opportunity with eagerness, and the reunion took place in September 2013 at Kesha's California residence. Accompanied by his high school best friend, Braden, who had dropped out in his junior year to pursue a life of drug dealing, he arrived filled with hope, seeking Kesha's support, who was well versed in the drug trade, to establish a large-scale marijuana operation in the area, and even discussed entering the medical cannabis market. The reality was that they had arrived to live in a small apartment, which had only one room. It is not hard to imagine that the situation in the place began to be tense, particularly because Sean, Kesha's partner, had 2 jobs and was the only one bringing in money to cover the expenses for 5 people. Kesha only contributed a part of the social assistance she received for her daughter. Kesha, Tony, and Braden spent their days using drugs, and the woman's younger daughter was all the time under that bad influence. Sean reached a breaking point when she discovered Tony and Braden selling marijuana near her house. She told them to stop, citing the danger to her as the property owner. Then, she issued an ultimatum: get a job or leave the apartment. But instead of complying, the group banded together against her, eventually leaving for a nearby hotel for 2 weeks. However, without income, they couldn't afford the hotel bill. They didn't consider getting a decent job due to their financial struggles. Their initial plan was to head back to Kansas, possibly because Tony was familiar with the area from his drug dealings. After nearly a day of driving, they decided to stop in Arizona and spend the night at a hotel. It was during their stay that Tony shared an idea with his companions to kill his adoptive parents in order to inherit their wealth. Once they arrived in Wichita and settled into a hotel room they'd rented for a month, they focused on finalizing the details of this plan. Tony had devised a straightforward plan. He would kill Roger and Melissa, collect the insurance payout, sell off their assets, and use the proceeds to launch a more extensive drug operation. Tony was convinced that his original family would amass a fortune by growing and selling marijuana. He even pinpointed the ideal day to carry out the crime: Friday, November 15th, 2013. This date suited him perfectly, since his brother Chris would be away, attending a wrestling event related to his practice. As a former wrestling star, Tony still maintained connections with some team members, which is how he learned about his brother's commitment that evening. Tony hatched a plan to invite Roger and Melissa to a meeting under the guise of discussing their past issues and making amends. While they were out, Braden would bring Kesha to the empty residence, where she would steal valuables. Tony knew the location of a stash of emergency cash his adoptive parents kept at home. The plan was to make it look like a botched robbery. When Roger and Melissa returned, Kesha would kill them. Initially, everyone thought the plan was solid, but Braden later got cold feet and refused to participate. He did, however, agree to help by obtaining the necessary guns. As an alternative, he suggested his friend Andrew, a former high school acquaintance, who could drive Kesha to the residence and play a supporting role in the crime. Braden obtained 2 pistols from other criminals as promised. It's worth noting that there was never any plan to share the money with Andrew, who was hired to drive and provide backup for Kesha during the robbery in exchange for $11,000. Kesha would ultimately be the one carrying out the heist. In early November 2013, Kesha shared a photo on social media of herself with Tony, accompanied by a caption that read, "A bond that cannot be broken." Then, on Friday, November 15th, Tony's prediction came true. His adoptive parents agreed to meet with him, just as he had foreseen. The encounter took place peacefully. At the Blummells' house, a completely different scenario unfolded. Following Roger and Melissa's departure for the meeting, Kesha and Andrew snuck in, broke into the garage, and started searching through the house. They seized the chance to steal some small valuable items and the cash the couple kept on hand for emergencies. With the first part of their plan accomplished, Kesha and Andrew concealed themselves near the secluded residence, lying in wait for their victims to return. Tony called, saying his meeting ended and he was dropped off at the hotel. The wait was short. As the Blummel vehicle stopped, two attackers emerged. Kesha stood by Melissa's side. Andrew aimed at Roger. Melissa, still shocked, recognized the mother of the adopted children. She barely said, "Oh my God, Kesha," before a shot to the head made her collapse. Roger, frantic, tried to help his wife. Kesha approached, gun aimed at him, but it jammed. She tried again, Roger frozen in shock beside his wife's body. The gun finally fired, and he collapsed next to her. After the fatal plan was executed, Kesha and Andrew hastily departed in the vehicle they had arrived in. The Blummel spouses remained at the scene until approximately 9:15 p.m. when Chris returned from his meeting to find the devastating scene. He quickly called 911, reporting that he had just arrived home to find his parents semi-conscious inside their van. He described Roger as coughing and Melissa as nodding her head up and down, both with visible gunshot wounds to their heads. The dispatcher instructed him to attempt resuscitation efforts while emergency services arrived shortly thereafter to take control of the situation. Miraculously, the Blummel was still alive, their lives clinging to a fragile thread, and were swiftly rushed to a hospital. Meanwhile, back at the hotel where they were staying, Kesha appeared to suffer a panic attack, declaring that she urgently needed to take an illicit substance, which she proceeded to do, joined by the other boys. Also, at that moment, Kesha handed over the used gun and a wallet containing stolen cash and micas to be discarded in a nearby stream. Andrew disposed of the evidence in a nearby park's pond. The next day, Tony used the proceeds to start dealing marijuana, earning his first $100 profit. Tragically, on the same day, Melissa lost her battle with illness and passed away at the age of 53. Tony visited his father in the hospital, unaware that he had been previously removed from the Blummells' will and insurance policies. As it turned out, the two heinous crimes had been committed for nothing. In the days that followed, it emerged that Andrew had not received payment and was even unaware that Kesha had stolen cash from the Blummel family's home. Eventually, fate caught up with them. During the initial inspection of the Blummel residence, the police observed that the garage door had been forced open, and upon entering the house, they found everything in disarray, with items scattered haphazardly. It was confirmed that money, jewelry, and other valuables had been stolen. The authorities considered the possibility that the attack on the couple had been a consequence of their arrival while the thieves were still inside. However, since the fatal assault had occurred prior to the couple's entry into the home, this initial hypothesis was soon dismissed. In the van where Roger and Melissa were attacked, no significant fingerprints were found, although investigators did discover a book casing. Then the authorities shifted their focus to the victims' workplaces, suspecting that a disgruntled client might have sought revenge. However, this theory was also ruled out, so it was time to interview people close to the couple. Tony was first on the detective's list, as he had been the last person seen alive with the victims. But he vehemently denied any involvement, claiming he knew nothing about the incident. According to him, after finishing dinner, he had returned directly to the hotel where he was staying with his mother. The hotel staff corroborated this alibi. Next on the list was Chris, who had discovered the bodies, but he was quickly cleared after verifying that he had been at a dinner with the wrestling team at the time of the incident. However, the investigators discovered an anomaly in his behavior. He didn't appear overly distraught, instead seeming lost in thought. When police pursued this lead and questioned him about his parents' disappearance, Chris promptly replied that one person came to mind. He added, that the only individual who might harbor a grudge against their parents and possibly be capable of such an act was his older brother, Tony. With this significant lead, the authorities caught a fortunate break in their hunt for the culprits. A man contacted the police, revealing that a young acquaintance of Tony's had approached him to buy a gun. The detectives homed in on this individual, and upon digging into his background, uncovered a long history of drug-related offenses. Furthermore, they discovered he had accompanied Tony on a trip to California. The suspect was none other than Braden. Shortly after, Braden received a message from his family warning him that the sheriff's office investigators were seeking to question him about the Blummel case. The morning after, Braden voluntarily went to the police station. According to a press report, on his way to the station, Braden stopped at a pond to dispose of an item, allegedly the guns used in the crime, which had not been discarded as planned. As it happened, he was already under surveillance. And when the police searched the water, they found an unused pistol in the bag he had thrown away. Braden's interrogation lasted 3 days, during which he initially denied any involvement in the incident. However, he eventually cracked under the pressure from the authorities, confessing everything he knew, revealing that the idea for the attack originated with Tony. Tony Blummel, 18, and his biological mother, Kesha, 35, were arrested on November 19, 2013, at their hotel. Andrew, also 18, was taken into custody, and Braden, another 18-year-old, was arrested the following day. Initially, Kesha denied any involvement in the robbery and other crimes, while the 3 young men confessed. On November 25, 2013, the accused made their first court appearance via video conference, facing identical charges: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, burglary, and theft. Bail was set at $500,000 for the 3 young men and $1 million for Kesha. On December 21st, Roger's heart stopped beating, and at just 48 years old, he was reunited with his beloved Melissa. Following Roger's death, the situation for the woman and the 3 young men took a dire turn as they faced the possibility of being charged with capital murder, which carried the risk of a death penalty sentence. On January 3, 2014, the 4 detainees were formally charged with 1 count of capital murder for allegedly killing multiple people in the same incident. Kesha also faced additional charges: 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of theft. The preliminary hearing took place on July 17th of that same year, by which time Braden had cut a deal with authorities, agreeing to become the prosecution's star witness in exchange for leniency in his sentence. In 2015, following a year of negotiations, Braden and 2 others implicated in the crime reached agreements with the prosecution. Under these agreements, the accused parties would not contest the charges brought against them, and in return, they would relinquish their right to appeal their sentences. In exchange, the prosecution agreed to refrain from pursuing the death penalty and to dismiss certain charges. In a series of separate hearings commencing mid-2015, each of the accused parties formally confirmed their intention to plead guilty. Kesha got life in prison without parole for capital murder, plus 10 years for aggravated robbery. Her sentences will run back to back. In court, she expressed regret and respect for the victim's family, but denied involvement in the crime. She's still in a high-security prison today. Tony Blummel, known to all as Tony, received the same sentence as his mother. At the hearing, his aunt Christina read a victim impact statement, thanking authorities for justice and mentioning the love Roger and Melissa had shown Tony. Tony listened in silence, tears welling up. Christina told him he'd chosen his path, and one day he might understand the consequences of those choices. Tony's now in a correctional facility with a record of many infractions. A week later, Andrew was found guilty of first and second-degree murder, sentenced to life and 155 months. Last, Braden, who'd made a deal with prosecutors, was guilty of second-degree murder, sentenced to 242 years. His first release chance is May 28, 2035, but he's had 71 disciplinary reports for bad behavior. District attorney satisfied with case outcome. Despite waiving appeal rights, Kesha tried and failed. Undisputed, Roger and Melissa Blumell's lives ended tragically. Kesha's excess-driven life led to tragedy, sparked by a descendant rejecting her. For his part, Tony repaid the couple's love and care with resentment, envy, and violence, opting for an unjustifiable path of substance abuse that ultimately led him to commit a double crime. As a consequence, Kesha's younger daughter was forced to grow up in a foster home. In contrast, Chris Blumell, with the support of his family, managed to overcome the ordeal and build a fulfilling life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3, 1949, in Lebanon, Indiana, USA, to carnival workers Lester Likens and his wife Betty Likens, formerly Grimes. She was the third of 5 children, with 2 older twins, Daniel and Diana, and 2 younger twins, Benny and Jenny. Sylvia's youngest sister Jenny had polio, which left her with a significantly weakened leg, causing her to limp noticeably. She had to wear a steel brace on her leg to help her walk. Sylvia's parents had a tumultuous marriage, with constant moving and financial struggles. They worked at carnival booths throughout Indiana during the summer, selling candy, beer, and soft drinks. To help out, the Likens children would often travel with their parents, but Sylvia and Jenny frequently stayed with relatives, mostly their grandmother. This arrangement not only kept the young girls safe, but also allowed them to have a more stable education. From a young age, Sylvia took on various responsibilities, including babysitting, running errands for neighbors and friends, and completing household chores like ironing clothes. In doing so, she earned some money, which she used to buy things for herself and occasionally shared with her mom. Those who knew her described Sylvia as a friendly, confident, and charming girl. She had long, wavy, light brown hair that fell just below her shoulders, and her friends affectionately called her Cookie. Despite her vibrant personality, Sylvia was self-conscious about her smile due to a missing front tooth, which she lost during a childhood accident while playing with one of her brothers. Sylvia loved music, particularly the Beatles, and was very protective of her younger sister Jenny, who was shy and less secure. The sisters frequently visited a local skating rink, where Sylvia would assist Jenny, holding her hand as Jenny relied heavily on her stronger leg. In June 1965, Sylvia and Jenny Likens were living with their parents in Indianapolis. The following month, their mother was arrested and jailed for theft. Shortly thereafter, their father arranged for his younger daughters to stay with Gertrude Benisi, a mother of 2 girls, Paula and Stephanie, whom the Likens sisters had met at Arsenal Technical High School. Gertrude promised their father that she would care for the girls as if they were her own until his return, which was expected to be just after the 4th of July celebrations. The Likens sisters, Sylvia and Jenny, moved into the Benisi home at 3850 East New York Street. Their father, older brothers, and eventually their mother went on the road with a carnival on the East Coast. As part of the arrangement, Gertrude Benisi would receive $20 a week to care for the sisters until their family returned in November. At first, things seemed normal at the household. Sylvia got along well with Stephanie, bonding over their shared love of popular music and helping with household chores. The Likens sisters regularly attended Sunday school with the other Benisi kids, and the pastor often commended Sylvia for her kindness and respect for sacred matters. However, when the payments for hosting the girls started coming in late, Gertrude's frustration mounted, and she began to mistreat them. This mistreatment involved physical punishments with thick objects, which eventually escalated into regular beatings, starvation, and humiliation. Sylvia faced the brunt of the abuse. Gertrude and her daughter Paula repeatedly accused Sylvia of engaging in inappropriate behavior with boys, which led to Gertrude physically kicking Sylvia in the groin and Paula physically attacking her. The girls were forced to eat food they disliked, and Sylvia was even beaten by Stephanie's boyfriend, Randolph Hubbard. daily life at the Banfi residence was brutal. Violence escalated over time. Paula's attacks on Sylvia were savage, including punching her in the face and breaking her own wrist. She targeted Sylvia's mouth and eyes, then used her cast to inflict more harm. The sisters faced relentless verbal and psychological abuse, including Gertrude's cruel accusations of promiscuity and forced attacks on each other. The abuse of Sylvia didn't only come from the Banofsky family. Coy Hubbard and his friends would visit Gertrude's home, tormenting Sylvia physically and verbally. Gertrude and her kids would join in, inflicting harm. Neighborhood kids would beat Sylvia, using her as a punching bag, and Gertrude would humiliate her, forcing her to undress and perform sexual acts for their entertainment. Gertrude expelled Sylvia from school as punishment for stealing a gym suit, which Sylvia had done because Gertrude refused to buy her clothes. This cruelty led to severe physical abuse, including beatings with a police belt and kicks to the genitals. Despite Stephanie's attempts to intervene, Gertrude continued to torment them, inflicting further pain by burning their fingertips with matches and whipping them. A few days later, Gertrude again employed the police belt to repeatedly whip Jenny after she allegedly stole a single tennis shoe from school to wear on her stronger foot. Due to the escalating frequency and brutality of the torture and mistreatment, Sylvia gradually became incontinent, a condition for which she was denied access to the bathroom and forced to wet herself as further punishment. On October 6, 1965, Gertrude confined Sylvia to the basement, binding her with rope. She often kept Sylvia naked, providing her with minimal sustenance and frequently denying her water. Sylvia was consistently tied to the stair railing in the basement, her feet barely touching the ground. The Banfi family would occasionally interrupt their physical and emotional torment to watch their favorite TV shows. Neighborhood boys would even pay 5 cents each to view Sylvia's body on display, participating in her humiliation, beating, burning, and mutilation during her captivity in the basement. Gertrude and her children restrained and silenced Sylvia, then submerged her in a bathtub of scorching hot water. Next, they rubbed salt into her injuries. After this incident, an anonymous caller, who was the father of a neighborhood boy named Michael John Monroe, contacted Arsenal School to report that a girl with severe skin lesions was living at the Banvi household. Since Sylvia had been absent from school for several days, a school nurse visited Gertrude's residence to investigate. Gertrude claimed to the nurse that Sylvia had run away from home the previous week and that she was unaware of her current whereabouts. She also alleged that Sylvia's skin lesions were a result of her poor personal hygiene and that she was a negative influence on both her own children and her sister. The school did not pursue any further investigation into Sylvia's whereabouts or well-being. In mid-October, John Benazzi Jr. subjected Sylvia to a cruel and sadistic prank. He offered her a plate of soup, only to swiftly pull it away as she attempted to eat with her hands, which was difficult for her due to her severe malnutrition. Afterwards, Gertrude permitted Sylvia to sleep upstairs, but warned her that she must not wet the bed. Before going to sleep, Sylvia quietly asked Jenny for a glass of water, hoping to avoid dehydration. However, the next morning, Gertrude found that Sylvia had urinated on herself, and as a punishment, forced her to perform a humiliating and degrading act, masturbating with a glass bottle in front of the Banvi children. Shortly thereafter, Gertrude shouted for Sylvia to return to the kitchen, then ordered her to strip naked before proclaiming that she had branded her daughters, and now she was going to brand her. Gertrude began carving the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it," onto Sylvia's abdomen with a heated needle. When Gertrude was unable to complete the markings, she instructed 14-year-old Richard Hobbs to finish etching the words into Sylvia's flesh while she took Jenny to a nearby grocery store. In what Hobbs would later insist were short, light etchings, he continued to brand the text into Sylvia's abdomen as she clenched her teeth and moaned. Richard and 10-year-old Shirley forcibly took Sylvia to the basement. There, they attempted to inflict a burn on Sylvia's body, specifically beneath her left breast, using an anchor bolt to create a mark resembling the letter S. However, due to their mistake of applying part of the loop in reverse, the resulting deep burn scar would instead look like the number 3. On that grim night, after enduring terrible abuse, Sylvia told her sister Jenny that she knew Jenny didn't want her to die, but she was sure she was going to die. The next day, Gertrude woke Sylvia and forced her to write a letter while dictating its contents. The plan was sinister. They intended to deceive Sylvia's parents into believing that Sylvia had run away from the Banvey residence. The content of this letter was intended to frame a group of anonymous local boys for extensively abusing and mutilating Sylvia after she had initially agreed to engage in sexual relations with them. After writing the letter, Sylvia was again tied to the basement stair railing, while Gertrude finalized her plan to abandon her in Jimmy's forest with the help of John Jr. and Jenny. Gertrude offered Sylvia cookies, but she refused, saying, "Give them to the dog, I don't want them." Enraged, Gertrude forced the cookies into Sylvia's mouth, and then she and John brutally beat her, targeting her stomach. On the morning of October 26th, Sylvia's condition had deteriorated. She could hardly speak or control her movements. Gertrude brought her to the kitchen, propping her against the wall, and tried to feed her a donut and a glass of milk. However, Sylvia struggled to hold the glass, which further infuriated Gertrude, who tossed her to the floor before returning her to the basement. Soon, Sylvia became delirious, repeatedly moaning and muttering incoherently. When Paula asked her to recite the alphabet, Sylvia couldn't get past the first 4 letters and was unable to stand up from the floor. Sylvia faced neighborhood bullies in the basement. She pointed out familiar faces, shouting names. After a failed attempt to bite a rotten pear, Jenny reminded her she couldn't feel her teeth, having lost one at 7. Exhausted and desperate, Sylvia tried to escape but collapsed. Gertrude punished her brutally, striking her head and knocking her out. Shortly after, at 5:30 p.m., Richard Hobbs returned to the Banvey residence and rushed to the basement, where he found Stephanie crying and cradling Sylvia's frail, wounded body. After their mother instructed Stephanie to clean Sylvia's body, she and Richard decided to give Sylvia a warm, soothing bath and dress her in fresh clothes. They laid her on a mattress in one of the bedrooms, where she whispered her final wish, for her father to be by her side or to be taken home. After suffering severe punishment and weakening from starvation, Sylvia finally succumbed to her injuries and died. When Stephanie realized Sylvia wasn't breathing, she attempted to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, while Gertrude hysterically screamed at the children in the house that Sylvia was faking her own death. Initially, Gertrude struck Sylvia's lifeless body with a book, yelling at her that she was lying and pretending, in a futile attempt to rouse her. Soon, overcome with panic, Gertrude instructed Richard Hobbs to call the authorities from a nearby payphone. When the police arrived at the address around 6:30 p.m., Gertrude escorted the officers to the bedroom, where she revealed Sylvia's brutally beaten and mutilated body lying on a dirty mattress. She then handed over the letter that Sylvia had been coerced into writing. Gertrude claimed to have cared for the young girl for over an hour before her death, applying antiseptic to her wounds in a futile attempt at first aid. According to Gertrude, Sylvia had run away from home with a group of teenagers. Returning to her house that afternoon, bare-chested and clutching the note. Having declared to everyone in the house that Sylvia's death was meant to happen, Paula looked at Jenny and calmly said that if Jenny wanted to live with them, they would treat her like their own sister. Following instructions she had received before the police arrived, Jenny recited the rehearsed version of the events leading up to Sylvia's death, before whispering to the officers to take them away, and that she would tell them everything. The formal statement from Jenny Likens led to the arrest of Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr. Benazzi on suspicion of Sylvia's murder just hours after her body was discovered. That same day, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs were also arrested and charged with the same crimes. The three older Banazi children, along with Coy Hubbard, were placed in a nearby juvenile detention center, while the younger Banazi children and Richard Hobbs were held at the Indianapolis Child Guardians Home, all detained without bail pending trial. Initially, Gertrude denied any involvement in Sylvia's death, but only a day into her detention, she confessed to knowing the children and acknowledged that her daughter Paula and Coy Hubbard had physically and emotionally abused Sylvia. Gertrude also admitted to forcing the girl to sleep in the basement on approximately 3 occasions when she had wet the bed. When an officer suggested that the probable reasons for Sylvia's incontinence were her mental distress and kidney injuries, Gertrude became evasive. Paula showed no remorse, signing a statement that admitted to repeatedly beating Sylvia. She also confessed to fracturing Sylvia's wrist and committing other brutal acts, including pushing her down the basement stairs 2 or 3 times. John Jr. confessed to whipping Sylvia once and frequently using his fist to abuse her, also admitting to burning her with matches on multiple occasions. The autopsy of Sylvia's body revealed over 150 separate injuries across her body, and she was severely emaciated at the time of her death. The injuries varied in location, nature, severity, and healing stage, including burns, severe bruises, and extensive damage to muscles and nerves. Her vaginal cavity was swollen and nearly closed, although an examination determined her hymen was still intact, debunking Gertrude's claims that Sylvia had been 3 months pregnant and the accusations of prostitution and promiscuity. The official cause of Sylvia Marie Likens's death was determined to be a subdural hematoma resulting from a severe blow to the right side of her head. The doctor also noted that the shock she sustained, primarily due to prolonged and severe injury to her skin and subcutaneous tissue, as well as chronic malnutrition, contributed to her demise. By the time her body was discovered, rigor mortis had fully set in, suggesting that she may have been deceased for up to 8 hours prior to discovery. Interestingly, although the autopsy revealed that Sylvia had been recently bathed, possibly post-mortem, this action may have accelerated the loss of body temperature and subsequent onset of rigor mortis. In May 1966, Gertrude Bissesi, her children Paula and John, and 2 neighborhood youths, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, were tried and convicted of neglect, torture, and murder in relation to Sylvia's death. Following 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gertrude Bissesi guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing her to life imprisonment. However, she was paroled in 1985. Paula was convicted of second-degree murder and released in 1972. Hobbs, Hubbard, and John were found guilty of manslaughter, serving less than 2 years in the Indiana Reformatory before being granted parole on February 27, 1968. In Indiana, the brutal murder and torture of Sylvia Likens is considered the state's worst crime. A seasoned investigator from the Indiana Police Department, with 35 years of experience, described it as the most sadistic case he had ever encountered. Sylvia tragically lost her life on October 26th in Indianapolis, Indiana, USA. Her parents were expected to return for her and her sister in November, but unfortunately, Sylvia passed away before their arrival. Sylvia and her sister Jenny lived in fear of reporting the escalating abuse and neglect to family members or school authorities. They worried that speaking out would worsen their already desperate situation. Jenny, in particular, struggled to overcome the urge to inform family members, fearing that Gertrude would retaliate by subjecting her to the same torture and abuse as her sister. Additionally, Jenny faced harassment from neighborhood girls who ridiculed and occasionally beat her whenever she mentioned Sylvia's situation. The middle-aged Bissesi couple, along with other families in the neighborhood, had suspicions or had witnessed signs of the girls being mistreated, but they were too afraid to report it to the authorities. Consequently, no one intervened to stop the abuse the Sylvia sisters suffered, and tragically, no one was able to rescue them from their horrific ordeal in time. In the aftermath, all those responsible for her torture and murder received prison sentences, although some did not serve their full terms. However, they cannot escape the guilt and horror they inflicted, which will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sarah Yarborough. Sarah Yarborough was born in Portland on June 12, 1975. Shortly after, her parents relocated to Federal Way, a suburb of Seattle, where she grew up with two siblings, forming a strong bond with her youngest brother. From an early age, Sarah demonstrated a keen interest in music and ballet, spending considerable time honing her skills. Her academic prowess earned her a spot in a school program that allowed her to travel to New Zealand twice. As she entered her teenage years, Sarah joined the cheerleading team at her high school, where she developed a large social circle. She was renowned for her kind and compassionate nature, often lending a helping hand to those in need. On Saturday, December 14, 1991, 16-year-old Sarah was supposed to meet her cheerleading team at the school building, where a bus would pick them up for an event. She drove her father's car to the school, but arrived at the wrong time, thinking the bus would arrive at 8 a.m. when it was actually scheduled for 9 a.m. As her friends gradually arrived at the meeting point, they couldn't find Sarah anywhere. Some students noticed her car in the parking lot, but she wasn't inside. Even when the bus arrived, Sarah was still missing. Her friends found this strange, but they had no way to contact her since they didn't have mobile phones at the time. Around the same time, two 12-year-old children were exploring the wooded area behind the tennis courts on the school grounds when they noticed something unusual. A man emerged from behind the bushes, took a breath, and walked away in the opposite direction. Although the children found this odd, they didn't pay much attention and continued walking. A few meters ahead, they stumbled upon a horrifying sight. A young woman lying unresponsive on the ground, who they thought might be dead. The children rushed back home to tell their parents, and one of the children's parents returned to the scene with them. Meanwhile, the other child's father decided to follow the suspicious man they had seen earlier. The child remembered seeing a car that resembled a Chevrolet Nova leaving the area, and since he lived near the school, his father decided to try to locate that car. After a while, he spotted a similar car, but unfortunately, he quickly lost sight of it and was unable to find it again. At the same time, the parents of the other child rushed to the school, where they discovered the young woman lying on the ground, likely dead. They promptly entered the school building and contacted the police. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed the young woman's death. They also quickly identified her as Sarah. The police deduced that the victim had been strangled, based on the marks on her neck. Some of her personal belongings, including her jacket, underwear, and socks, were found nearby. However, her purse and car keys were discovered in the school parking lot, leading investigators to suspect that the assailant might have attacked her near her vehicle and then dragged her behind the trees. The body was sent to forensic experts for examination, and the police initiated their search for evidence. As a first step, they interviewed everyone who was in the school premises and its surrounding area. The two boys who discovered Sarah provided a rough description of the man who emerged from behind the bushes near her body. They described him as a tall, approximately 20-year-old man with shoulder-length, reddish hair, wearing a dark coat and black trousers. Soon, the police located another witness, and this is where the story takes a surprising turn. A man out for a run observed a strange scene in the same wooded area. He saw a girl lying next to the bushes, with a man hovering over her. The girl was completely still, and the witness initially thought the couple was engaging in intimate behavior in that spot. However, when he ran back through the area in the opposite direction a few minutes later, both the man and the girl were still there, in the same positions. At no point did he suspect that a serious crime was being committed. The witness, a recent immigrant to the United States from a different cultural background, was uncertain about typical behavior in the country. Despite this, He was able to provide the police with a rough description of the attacker, which matched the accounts given by the children who found Sarah's body. The police interviewed dozens of people who had been near the school, but no other useful information came to light. The medical examiners who performed the autopsy on Sarah's body determined that the cause of death was strangulation. It appeared that the attacker had used his own socks to strangle her. A severe head wound was also found, and experts believed that Sarah had lost consciousness due to this blow, which correlated with the runner's account of seeing her lying motionless on the ground. Forensic experts analyzed Sarah's clothing and discovered traces of male DNA on nearly all her garments. However, at that time, in 1991, there was no DNA database to match these samples against, so investigators had to rely on direct comparisons with DNA samples from specific suspects. Another significant finding was that although forensic experts found male DNA on Sarah's clothing, the forensic doctor reported no signs of sexual assault on her body. Based on this information, investigators pieced together their own theory of what happened. Since Sarah had arrived at the school almost an hour early, and she was alone in the parking lot, it's likely that her attacker saw her, waited for her to leave the car, struck her on the head with an object, causing her to lose consciousness. The attacker then dragged her body behind some trees, where it was later found. The assailant removed some of her clothing, engaged in inappropriate acts, and eventually strangled her using her own socks. When the children who found Sarah's body reported the car they thought the attacker had fled in, detectives started searching for a Chevrolet Nova. They soon found one, but the driver proved to have an alibi. He had just delivered donuts that morning, and his DNA didn't match the DNA on Sarah's clothes. It seemed the kids had simply seen the car driving by and mistakenly assumed the killer was inside. In fact, none of them could recall for certain whether they had seen a man get into a car from the bushes. In the days that followed, police continued to search for witnesses and new leads, but made no significant progress. Despite the horror of the event, classes resumed on Monday. The fact that the murder had occurred just a short distance from their school, and the killer remained at large with no known identity, added to the unease. Afraid to walk alone, the girls were escorted to their cars or buses by the boys from the sports teams, ensuring they weren't left alone on the street. Approximately 70 potential witnesses were present at the school and its surroundings on the morning of the incident. Investigators interviewed each of them, but unfortunately, no new information came to light. Based on the accounts of the two children and the runner, a composite sketch of the attacker was created and circulated to local newspapers and television stations. The case received widespread media attention, and over the next few weeks, the police received hundreds of testimony. Each tip was thoroughly investigated, but in every instance, it led to a dead end. One promising lead involved a man who matched the suspect's description and had a criminal record. However, his DNA did not match the sample found on the victim's clothing, and the lead was eventually ruled out. The case remained stagnant for months, with the police dealing with a staggering 4,000 tips, but lacking the resources to effectively follow up on each one. As new cases emerged monthly, the investigators' attention was increasingly divided, further hindering progress on the case. When Sarah's family learned that the police were struggling to manage the influx of tips, they stepped in to help in any way they could. One family member worked for a tech company and successfully lobbied the company's management to lend the police department a powerful computer worth $150,000 in the 1990s. This generous donation allowed the police to centralize and process the leads more efficiently, categorizing them for easy review. Despite their best efforts, however, every lead ultimately led to a dead end, and the case remained stagnant for years to come. 2 years later, Sarah's classmates prepared to graduate, and as a tribute to their friend, they raised a substantial amount of money to create a memorial in her honor. The memorial took the form of a bench featuring a metal casting of Sarah's belongings alongside a poignant photo of her dog reaching for her purse. Although the case was periodically reopened and re-examined in the years that followed, the outcome remained the same. The perpetrator remained at large. During this time, the police conducted thousands of interviews and collected DNA samples from nearly 300 potential suspects, but all these efforts ultimately proved fruitless. In 2011, 20 years after the murder, a detective decided to utilize modern technology to aid in the investigation. He contacted a genetic genealogy company, inquiring if they could help locate relatives of the individual who left DNA on the victim's body. The experts accepted the challenge, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. Two main factors contributed to their failure. Firstly, genetic genealogy was still in its early stages, and the experts' capabilities were limited. For instance, they couldn't simultaneously search for both male and female relatives from the same DNA sample. If the DNA was from a male, they could only search for male familial connections, and vice versa. Secondly, legal obstacles hindered their progress, as various laws prohibited the use of genetic data samples to search for relatives of suspects. The researchers the detective approached had spent years tracing the genetic family tree of the British passengers who arrived in the United States on the Mayflower in 1620. By analyzing the DNA of Sarah's attacker, they found a link to one of the ship's passengers, Robert Fuller. However, tracking the attacker's lineage proved extremely difficult, especially considering the passage of time. Although the Mayflower had only around 100 passengers, their descendants now number over 25 million. Despite the initial setback, this was the first time genetic genealogy had been used to solve a crime. The detective gathered available information and identified several local residents with the surname Fuller. He showed them pictures of the men, but none were recognized by the witnesses, including a runner and two men who had stumbled upon the body as children. Next, the detective collected DNA samples from all the local Fullers and sent them to the lab. Although none of the samples matched the attacker's DNA, one surprising discovery emerged. One of the men was a distant descendant of Robert Fuller from the Mayflower. However, he was not the killer and had no knowledge of any distant relatives living nearby. The detective retired in 2017, and a new team of investigators took over the case. In 2011, a company had taken over the study of the DNA sample from the assailant, and the new team reached out to them. Given the significant advancements in genetic material study capabilities, the experts agreed to try to trace the assailant's lineage. Over the next 2 years, they painstakingly worked through public databases to find even the most distant relatives of the assailant, then manually traced their family connections to individuals who lived during the time of Sarah's death. After eliminating several thousand individuals, they finally got a break in September 2019. They identified two new potential suspects, brothers Edward and Patrick Nicholas, who were descendants of Robert Fuller. The experts concluded that it was highly probable that a DNA sample found on Sarah's clothing belonged to one of the brothers at the time of the murder. The older brother, Edward, was a career criminal with a long history of violent offenses, and his DNA profile was already in the FBI database, ruling him out as a suspect in Sarah's murder. The younger brother, Patrick Nicholas, had also been arrested multiple times for violent crimes, but his DNA sample was not in the database because it was collected before the DNA profiles of offenders were added. The detectives put 55-year-old Patrick under surveillance right away. 2 days later, they got their chance. Patrick went to the laundromat, and while waiting for his clothes to wash, he stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. When he was done, he carelessly threw the butt on the ground. One of the officers quickly picked it up and put it in an evidence bag, then returned to his car. Patrick repeated this process, stepping outside to smoke again, and this time a cloth handkerchief accidentally fell out of his pocket. The police thought it wise to take this second piece of evidence, just in case they couldn't get a DNA sample from the cigarette butt. As it turned out, the forensic experts had no problem obtaining samples from both items. The next day, they had the long-awaited news for the detective. Patrick's DNA matched the traces found on Sarah's clothing back in 1991 perfectly. The judge immediately issued a warrant for Patrick's arrest, and the police took him into custody. It took investigators 5 days to identify the suspect and formally charge him with murder. Once his biography was made public, an obvious question arose. Why had a man with such a criminal history not been considered a suspect for 28 years? Patrick Nicholas, at 19, had attempted to assault a young woman who managed to escape by jumping into a river and swimming to safety. He was later arrested and spent 4 years in prison. In 1994, he was arrested again for trying to assault a minor, but his DNA was not recorded in any database because the charge was not serious enough. Over the next 3 decades, his name never surfaced during investigations, and he didn't appear in over 4,000 leads. It was eventually revealed that genetic genealogy experts couldn't trace him back to Robert Fuller because Patrick was adopted and grew up with a different surname. One of the men who discovered Sarah's body when they were children in 1991 immediately asserted that Patrick was undoubtedly the same killer. He admitted that the incident had deeply affected him, as he was only 12 years old when the body was discovered, and the perpetrator had seen his face for many years. The witness lived in constant fear that the killer would come after him, and only after Patrick's arrest did he finally feel safe. Patrick's trial did not start until 2023. Despite claiming innocence, the main piece of evidence, his DNA on the victim's clothing, was a major obstacle. His lawyer attempted to argue that the presence of Patrick's DNA did not necessarily mean he was guilty, but this claim was dismissed. The lawyer also questioned the accuracy of the DNA analysis, but experts deemed this entirely unreliable. In the end, Patrick was found guilty of first-degree murder without premeditation on May 25th. He received a prison sentence of 45 years and 8 months, effectively ensuring he would never be released. At the sentencing, Patrick remained emotionless, in contrast to Sarah's family, who thanked the judge, trial participants, and investigators for bringing the killer to justice after 28 years of evasion. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lucy Landry. Lucy Davies was born in 1971 in Rhondda, a county in England. She was the daughter of Roger and Andrea Davies and had a younger sister named Anna. The family lived in a small, tight-knit community of socially purposed housing, surrounded by stunning mountain scenery. Lucy had a happy and carefree childhood, bonding closely with her sister, who shared similar interests. Her parents often mentioned Lucy's infectious joy, which made her a standout student in primary school. Known for her outgoing and likable personality, Lucy quickly won over her teachers and classmates. With her undeniable beauty, she became one of the most popular and admired girls in school. Lucy and her sister Anna shared a passion for ponies, which led their father to enroll them in the local riding club. This experience taught them discipline and showcased their talent, eventually earning them the right to participate in various events and competitions. By the time Lucy started secondary school, she had developed into an exceptional rider. In addition to her riding skills, Lucy was also a talented musician. She took flute and piano lessons, dedicating long hours to practice and master both instruments. Her hard work paid off, and soon she had a comprehensive understanding of classical music. This led to her acceptance into a youth orchestra and her school's choir group. During this time, Lucy developed a romantic interest in Gareth Jenkins, but she kept it a secret. After completing secondary school in 1989, Lucy decided to pursue a music-related career. She enrolled in the University of Warwick to study for a bachelor's degree, hoping to become a music teacher. However, she soon realized that the degree program wasn't what she had expected. Her passion for music remained, but she didn't enjoy the direction of the program. As a result, Lucy changed her plan and opted to study urban planning instead. Around this time, Lucy met Gra McAllister, and they soon discovered that they shared a similar outlook on life, including a passion for art and common interests. A key aspect of their bond was their matching sense of humor. Their relationship developed naturally, and as they made plans for the future, Lucy decided to introduce Gra to her parents, Roger and Andrea. The meeting went well, and Lucy's parents were convinced that Gra was the right person for their daughter. In fact, they were so confident in their relationship that they bought Lucy a house in Coventry, northwest of London. This gift not only provided Lucy with a stable home, free from the uncertainties of renting and moving, but also reflected their wish for her to start a family. Shortly after moving in, Lucy invited Gra to live with her, and they continued their studies together. In 1995, they welcomed their first child, James. Lucy decided to take a break from university to care for him while Gra continued his studies and worked the night shift at the city's postal sorting office. Over time, this arrangement took a toll on Lucy, who felt bored and isolated at home, caring for their child and often separated from her partner for long periods. To alleviate her boredom, Lucy turned to internet chat rooms, seeking to meet new people and find some distraction. One night, Lucy engaged in lively conversations in various online chat rooms, where she encountered Harold Landry, a 53-year-old American from Louisiana. Growing up in a financially struggling family with a dozen siblings, Harold knew from an early age that he had to rely on his own efforts and determination to succeed. To escape poverty, he dedicated himself to hard work from a young age. His big break came when he realized that the key to success in the oil business wasn't owning wells, but providing essential infrastructure to well owners. Consequently, he founded a company specializing in designing and manufacturing hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States. As he had predicted, the business made him incredibly wealthy, eventually earning him billionaire status. By then, Harold split his time between his central hobbies and a property on KML Island in Mexico. He had been married and divorced twice, with children from these unions, whose exact number and identities remained private. One thing was certain, however: Harold ensured that his children lacked nothing. A significant event took place in 1992 when Harold, now single, met a woman 20 years younger who was married. Despite her marital status, Harold used his charms to win her over, undeterred by her family's or husband's potential opposition. On February 6, 1994, Harold took her on an outing in New Orleans, hiring a babysitter to watch her children. After their evening together, Harold dropped his lover off at home and offered to drive the babysitter back to her own place. Surprisingly, no one seemed worried that her husband would discover the infidelity and react angrily. However, that's precisely what happened. Outside his wife's residence, Chris Price had been keeping a close eye on her every move. When the third party said goodbye to her, Chris followed him in his car. A short while later, Harold noticed he was being tailed. Acting on instinct, Harold opened the glove compartment, pulled out a firearm he normally kept there, and prepared for a confrontation. When they both stopped at a red light, the situation escalated. According to the babysitter's account, Harold brandished the revolver at Chris and fired. The bullet severely injured Chris, severing an artery in his neck and damaging a nerve connected to his vocal cord. Chris collapsed on the pavement, but luckily, there was a hospital nearby, allowing him to receive prompt medical attention. The doctors were able to save his life. Harold was arrested and charged with attempted murder. His trial took place in 1997. The defense attorney argued in the opening statement that Harold's actions were the result of a tragic and sordid affair involving Chris, and that he had acted out of fear and in self-defense. This strategy led the jury, composed of 4 men and 8 women, to convict Harold of the lesser offense of aggravated assault. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, after an appeal, Harold was granted probation in exchange for a $500 fine and community service. Although he had hoped to be fully exonerated, he thanked his lawyer, Pat, for his efforts. The two men subsequently became close friends. After reaching a confidential agreement with Chris, Harold moved to Covington, where he lived a life of luxury, free from financial worries. When he started chatting with Lucy, he was open about his past, sharing stories about his jobs, romantic escapades, and legal issues. However, instead of deterring Lucy, this honesty only strengthened her attraction to him. The two began a captivating online romance, with Harold promising her a highly desirable lifestyle. Eventually, his persistence and persuasive abilities convinced Lucy to end her relationship with Gra, clearing the way for Harold to pursue her without any rival claiming his attention. In the early 2000s, Harold traveled to England to meet Lucy, and she took the opportunity to introduce him to her parents, Roger and Andrea, as her boyfriend. Although they were surprised by the significant age difference, they respected their daughter's decisions and did not object to the relationship. Harold felt fulfilled and fortunate to share his life with Lucy, and he spared no effort to surprise her, whether with luxurious gifts or anything else she desired. In fact, by then, he was so in love that he was already planning to propose marriage. However, he wanted to do it in an ideal setting. To achieve this goal, Harold took Lucy, her son James, and Gra on a trip to Mexico, a place that had become his favorite destination in the world. His longtime friend Pat, who had been his attorney in the past trial, also had an apartment close to his residence, which added to the feeling of comfort. Initially, Harold bought a diamond ring and shared the news with enthusiasm with Pat. However, Pat harbored certain suspicions about Lucy, and as the days passed, he found it strange that she had dedicated a good part of her time in Gra's company. Despite this, Harold was oblivious to it, and ultimately proceeded with his plan to propose. Lucy happily accepted the proposal, and in mid-2003, the couple celebrated their union. Shortly after, Harold surprised Lucy by buying a $1 million property in an exclusive Worcester neighborhood. In this peaceful rural setting, their marriage got off to a prosperous start, helped by their excellent neighbors, Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, with whom they formed a close friendship. Soon, Lucy gave birth to their first daughter, Harriet, which filled both her and Harold with joy. From then on, he devoted himself to the little girl with unwavering energy and commitment. He also maintained a loving relationship with James, treating him like his own son. As time passed, Lucy's workload increased, and her mood began to deteriorate in proportion to Harold's demands. He expected her to constantly adapt to his preferences and obey his requests without question. Lucy, however, had different expectations. This led to rising tensions between them. Lucy was outspoken and unafraid to express her opinions, but Harold was unwilling to compromise. Given their volatile personalities, their arguments frequently escalated into intense fights, followed by reconciliations once the conflict had subsided. The constant disputes that lasted for hours became a familiar background noise in the lives of Rachel and Stephen. They knew that Lucy and Harold's alcoholism fueled their arguments and complaints, which often led to days of not speaking to each other. Lucy reconnected with Gareth, an old friend from secondary school, and they spent hours catching up, occasionally interrupted by their own commitments. One evening, after Harold fell asleep, Lucy stayed on her computer, and it dawned on him that she was unhappy and looking for a distraction, possibly even a replacement, just like she had found him. In the autumn of 2009, Lucy invited Gareth to stay with her. Meanwhile, Harold returned to England, hoping to salvage their marriage, but as soon as he arrived home, Lucy asked him for a divorce. Initially, Harold was devastated, but after a few weeks, he started a new relationship with a woman he met online. Alongside their budding new relationships, divorce negotiations were progressing, and as is often the case, new disputes arose, particularly regarding the family home. Lucy's expectation was to retain the house, thereby guaranteeing a stable living arrangement for their children. However, Harold was adamant that this was not up for discussion. His proposed solution involved offering her financial compensation to purchase a more modest apartment independently. Simultaneously, he made the decision to entirely remove her from his will. Lucy was furious when she learned about her still husband's latest decisions. Her intense hatred towards him led her to share every detail about Harold's past with her son James, holding nothing back. Amidst the tension and complicated situation, Gareth invited her to take a break and spend a few days with him in Wales. Both Lucy and Harold had a serious drinking problem, and their arguments were becoming increasingly violent, leaving their children to suffer in a toxic environment. On the afternoon of February 1st, 2010, Harold had several glasses of wine. When Stephen returned from work, he found a notification that his package had been delivered to the wrong address, the Landrys. Harold invited Stephen in and offered him a glass of wine. This led to a ridiculous argument with Lucy over a piece of furniture she wanted to buy for their upcoming move. The argument quickly turned physical, and in the chaos, Harold grabbed a kitchen utensil and hit Lucy on the cheek. James rushed to the scene of the altercation and found his mother, Lucy, badly injured. He immediately called the police and then turned his attention to ensuring his younger sister's safety. Shortly after, Lucy, realizing she needed help, left the house with her children. Her first thought was to seek refuge at Stephen's house, which was nearby. As she headed in that direction, Harold caught up with her and attacked her with a knife, inflicting multiple injuries. He then left her lying under a bush in the garden, abandoning her. Stephen, alerted by Lucy's screams, rushed outside and found her just a few steps away. Initially, he thought she was unconscious, but quickly realized the gravity of the situation. The police responded promptly to the emergency call and arrived on the scene. They called for paramedics and searched the surrounding area for Harold, but only found the terrified children hiding in the backyard. The paramedics worked quickly to treat Lucy and rushed her to the hospital, where her heart unfortunately stopped beating shortly after arrival. Harold visited Rachel's house and confessed to her that a terrible event had occurred, but he didn't provide any additional information. He handed her 3 bank drafts worth a total of $40,000, some cash, the keys to his car, and several signed blank checks. After that, he headed back home. By then, multiple police patrols were searching for him. They eventually found him walking along the road and arrested him. Roger and Andrea were consumed by grief when they heard the devastating news. In a statement released by the police, they requested that people respect their privacy during this incredibly difficult time following the loss of their daughter. From that point on, their focus shifted to taking care of their grandchildren. The forensic examination revealed that Lucy's death was caused by multiple stab wounds to the chest. With this evidence, combined with James's eyewitness testimony, Harold was charged with murder on February 5, 2010, when he appeared in court. The trial took place in early February 2011, presided over by Judge David Fosin. Unlike previous instances, Pat did not serve as Harold's defender. Instead, attorney Andy Childs took on the role. Despite the challenging task ahead, Childs argued that Harold had been provoked by his wife's intense anger, leaving him no choice but to react as he did. During his emotional testimony, Harold expressed his love for Lucy and regretted his actions. Following the strategy outlined by his lawyer, Harold admitted to involuntary manslaughter, claiming that Lucy had driven him to his limits. To emphasize the brutality of the case, the prosecution presented a detailed animation in court, recreating the multiple injuries the victim suffered. This graphic presentation shocked those present in the courtroom. Ultimately, on February 24, 2011, the jury delivered a verdict after less than 4 hours of deliberation. They found Harold Landry guilty of murdering his 38-year-old wife, Lucy Landry, when he was 64 years old. The next day, the judge imposed the sentence. He strongly condemned Harold's actions, calling them indescribable and unforgivable. The judge rejected Harold's claims that Lucy may have provoked him, seeing them as a desperate attempt to avoid blame. As a result, Harold received a life sentence with a minimum term of 16 years before being eligible for parole. By the time he would be eligible, he would be over 80 years old. Lucy's loved ones expressed gratitude, not only for the resolution of the case, but also for the judge's thoughtful comments, which they felt accurately reflected their own emotions. They acknowledged that the sentence brought some sense of relief from their pain, although they recognized that no length of sentence could restore Lucy's life, and they would need to come to terms with this difficult reality. Harold, on the other hand, maintained his claim of innocence, stating that he hoped to appeal the sentence in the future. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Banaz Mahmoud. Banaz Mahmoud was born in Iraq in 1985. She grew up in a traditional family with strong religious beliefs. When she was 10, her family moved to the UK, but their cultural values remained unchanged. At 17, Banaz was forced into a marriage with a man 10 years her senior, who spoke no English and was illiterate. The marriage was marked by physical and emotional abuse, which Banaz endured for 2 years before finally finding the courage to leave. Despite her family's disapproval, Banaz started a new life and met a man named Rahmat Suleimani, with whom she fell deeply in love. However, their relationship was kept secret due to the cultural taboos surrounding romance outside of marriage. Tragically, Banaz's family was not willing to let her move on from her past. On January 26, 2006, Rahmat reported Banaz missing to the police, but they didn't take the report seriously, convinced that she was just staying with friends. However, Rahmat persisted, and eventually the police were forced to investigate. Banaz's family had a sinister motive for their behavior, which would ultimately lead to devastating consequences. However, Banaz had found love and happiness with her boyfriend, Rahmat. They had dreams of getting married, having children, and building a happy family life. These fantasies brought Banaz joy and kept her going despite her family's hatred and aggression towards her. Her family had never accepted her husband, and in early October 2005, Banaz noticed that she was being followed by people sent by her father. On October 10, 2005, Banaz went to the police and told them about her life with her husband, the injuries she had suffered, and the surveillance she was under. She shared her fears for her safety and even her life, but the police did not take her statement seriously. For about 2 months, Banaz and Rahmat met secretly, but in early December 2005, they were spotted by people from her clan. This led to a council of male relatives gathering at her family home, where it was decided that Banaz should be killed to restore the family's honor. Banaz overheard this conversation and reported it to the police, but they again did not take her words seriously. 2 weeks later, Banaz's father tricked her into going to a relative's house, where she was attacked. She managed to escape and went to the police, who took her to the hospital. After being discharged, Banaz went to live with Rahmat. However, by mid-January 2006, Banaz's family began urging her to return home to mend their relationship and discuss her marriage to Rahmat. Despite her fears, Banaz agreed to go back to her father's house, believing that her mother would protect her. Before Banaz Mahmoud returned to her family's home, she visited the police station to report her concerns and name individuals who might harm her. However, she disappeared on January 22, 2006, and her friend Rahmat was unable to contact her. Rahmat then filed a missing persons report with the police. The police eventually became involved in the case, and Chief Inspector Caroline Good was appointed to lead the investigation. She organized a large-scale search of properties associated with the Mahmoud family, suspecting that Banaz might be being held captive. The police questioned Banaz's father, uncle, and ex-husband, as well as 3 of her cousins, Omar Hussein, Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Hamid, who were also suspects. Despite the efforts of the police, Banaz's family was uncooperative and refused to help with the investigation. The police found no pictures of Banaz at her family's home, and her family members gave contradictory and false statements about her whereabouts. The police arrested 30 people, including Banaz's family members and cousins, but they all tried to slow down the investigation by giving false information. The police obtained permission to install listening devices in the cells of the arrested men, including Banaz's father, uncle, and Muhammad Hamid. The wiretap recordings revealed that the three men had no remorse for their actions and were actually proud of what they had done to Banaz. The recordings revealed that on the morning of January 23rd, the Mahmoud family deliberately left their home, allowing Ali Hussein and Hamid to enter and attack Banaz. The attack lasted for 2 hours, during which Banaz was subjected to beatings and violence. Finally, Hamid strangled her to death with a cord. The wiretap recordings also revealed that Banaz's cousin, Muhammad Hamid, had been involved in the attack and had threatened Rahmat, which became a turning point in the investigation. The police were horrified as they listened to recordings that detailed the brutal murder of Banaz and the perpetrators' proud descriptions of their actions. The investigation revealed that Banaz's body had been stuffed into a suitcase and taken out of London to a derelict house with a garden in Birmingham. Caroline Good, a detective, matched the information she received with the movement data of the arrested phones and determined the search area. Despite the vastness of the area, the work could take a long time, but the criminals themselves helped the investigation by being talkative and reveling in their actions. During the conversation, one of them mentioned putting a freezer back in its place, which gave Caroline a key lead to follow. A police helicopter was dispatched to search the area, and while circling, it spotted a house with a pile of trash in the backyard, including a white, oblong object that looked like a freezer. When the police inspected the area, they started digging in shifts. As they dug, they eventually reached a depth of about shoulder height. At this point, they were about to give up. But then Caroline Good recalled the words of Muhammad Hamama, who had bragged about burying Banaz so deeply that she would only be discovered if someone tipped them off. Caroline convinced the team to extend the search for one more day, and late in the evening of April 28, 2006, the suitcase was found. Banaz's remains were in extremely poor condition, and only dental records and DNA samples could be used to identify her. Her body was folded into a fetal position and hidden in a suitcase, buried under a freezer in the garden of a house in Birmingham. On May 1, 2006, the suspects were charged, but they showed no remorse and were convinced they had done the right thing. After the discovery of Banaz's remains, the police received a flood of people providing alibis for the suspects, claiming they were in public on the day of the alleged murder. In total, 50 people were involved in Banaz's death, and Caroline Good felt anger, disgust, and contempt for the men who participated in the murder. The case eventually went to trial in March 2007, and the prosecutor described the crime as a cold-blooded and heartless execution ordered by Banaz's father and uncle. In June 2007, a jury found all three guilty and sentenced them to life imprisonment with minimum terms ranging from 17 to 23 years. The judge condemned the crime as barbaric and heartless, saying that the father had put his status in society above the life of his own flesh and blood. Muhammad Ali was arrested in Iraq in April 2006 for a crime against a young woman named Banaz Mahmoud. The London police worked to extradite him to the UK. In June 2009, Ali was extradited and eventually sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. The last of the 5 perpetrators, Omar Hussein, was hiding in the Iraqi countryside. In December 2009, he got into an argument with his brother and was shot in the leg. He was taken to the hospital, where the police arrested him. Initially, Hussein denied being in London in 2005 and therefore couldn't be involved in Banaz's death. However, UK social security records proved that he was receiving refugee benefits at the time, contradicting his claim. In March 2010, Hussein was extradited and later sentenced to life imprisonment. Donna Ammon, who was in the house at the time of Banaz's murder, was sentenced to 8 years in prison for helping to dispose of the victim's body and obstructing justice. A recorded interview at the police station revealed her family's guilt. Banaz had tried to leave her abusive husband several times, but returned to try again at the insistence of her family. The police's indifference to her plight led to her death, which sparked significant changes in how honor killings are handled. An inquiry into police misconduct was launched, and 9 police officers were prosecuted for their inadequate response. 7 received reprimands, and 2 were dismissed. Caroline Good, a determined detective, not only found Banaz's body, but also secured the conviction of her father and uncle, and brought back the escaped criminals from Iraq. Unfortunately, this wouldn't bring Banaz back to life, or change the fact that her own relatives, who should have protected her, were responsible for her death. Banaz was buried in the Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery in Morden. A memorial service was held on June 26, 2007, at the MN Auditorium, followed by a granite memorial headstone at her grave. Her family did not attend either service. The memorial was paid for by law enforcement officials working on the Banaz case and the women's rights organization. Ramat Suleimani, Banaz's boyfriend, remained in the UK under the Witness Protection Program but never recovered from her death. In May 2016, 10 years after the crime, he hanged himself, marking his 3rd attempt to end his life. The extent of the problem with police handling of honor crimes is unknown due to the lack of recording requirements. However, estimates suggest that in 2000, there were 5,000 honor killings worldwide, and in 2010, over 2,800 cases of honor-based violence were reported in Iran and Kurdistan. These crimes typically involve women who are perceived to have brought shame to their families or communities. Most cases occur in South Asia or the Middle East, predominantly in Muslim communities. However, cases like that of 19-year-old Banaz Mahmoud, a Kurdish woman living in Britain, highlight the tensions faced by immigrant communities as they struggle to adapt to changing lifestyles. Some groups estimate that thousands of honor crimes go unreported in minority communities in Britain, where women are often taken abroad and forced into marriage or harmed when their modern outlook on life conflicts with their traditional male communities. Banaz Mahmoud, who was murdered in 2006, is a tragic example of this. Her older sister, Beal, urges other women in similar situations not to be afraid to seek help before it's too late. Even today, Beal lives in fear for her life, hiding her identity behind a long black veil that covers her entire body and face, except for her eyes. The story of Banaz Mahmoud is a stark reminder that women who try to escape or live a secret life are constantly in fear of being found and punished. The Metropolitan Police team that investigated Banaz's murder and brought those responsible to justice was awarded for their work in detective investigation. A crucial piece of evidence was a videotape that captured Banaz's nervous testimony, in which she described the violence and oppression she faced at the hands of her abusive husband and the intimidation she suffered from men on the street. She warned of her impending death due to the shame she had brought upon her family. Unfortunately, her warnings were ignored, and she was ultimately killed. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lily James. Lily James was born in May 2002 in Yarborough, New South Wales, Australia. She was the beloved first child of the close-knit James family, especially adored by her maternal grandmother, Barbara. Growing up by the ocean with her younger brother Max, Lily was known for her active and enduring nature, with a passion for swimming. Her father, who coached water polo at an Anglican girls' school, supported her interest. Her friends remembered her as sociable, friendly, and excelling in her studies, always willing to help others, which made her very popular. In her upper school years, Lily's achievements in academics, sports, and community life were recognized, and she was considered one of the best students. Her incredible talent to excel in all areas of activity was undeniable. She also had a passion for the dramatic arts, which led her to participate in the theatre and dance club. She was eventually invited to perform at the famous Woodford Folk Festival, one of Australia's largest annual events. During the event, Lily impressed the audience with her rendition of a monologue from William Shakespeare's Macbeth, showcasing her skills, charisma, and allure, and securing second place in the theatre category. In 2018, Lily passed her beginner's driving test, adding to her list of accomplishments. Her athletic successes were also noteworthy, as she began to pursue water polo professionally, earning the title of swimming champion in the under-17 category. Her parents were thrilled with her successes and celebrated each accomplishment grandly. By her senior year, Lily had decided to focus on a sports career, and in 2020, she enrolled at Sydney Technological University to pursue a bachelor's degree in sports business management. In 2021, Lily started a new job as a water polo coach at St Andrew's Cathedral School to gain teaching experience and spice up her college routine. Thanks to her youth, vibrant personality, and love for sports, she quickly connected with her colleagues, the administration, and her students, trying to find a unique approach to each student and highlight their strengths. It was during this time that Lily met Paul, the new cricket and hockey coach, who caught her attention. Initially, their interaction was friendly and limited to mutual greetings, but it later developed into a romance. Lily fell in love, unaware of Paul's true nature. He showered her with compliments, gave her flowers, and organized evenings together. They agreed to keep their relationship private due to school policy and Lily's personal beliefs. However, over time, rumors began to spread, and Lily discovered that Paul had broken their agreement and portrayed her in a negative light. She felt betrayed and humiliated, so she confronted Paul and ended the relationship. On October 26, 2023, the principal of St Andrew's Cathedral School in central Sydney sent an email to students and parents at 4:30 a.m. announcing that the school would be closed until the end of the week due to a critical incident. 2 hours later, a second notification reassured families that none of the students were involved in the incident. However, graduating students sitting for exams were exempt from the closure. The school provided psychological support to those affected by the situation. A 24/7 consultation center was set up in the school library to provide assistance. On Thursday and Friday, forensic teams thoroughly searched the school building and surrounding area. Access to the gym was restricted, and the adjacent shower area was scheduled for demolition. The reason for the school's closure was slowly revealed. On October 25, 2023, around midnight, the body of 20-year-old Lily James, the school's water polo coach, was found in the school shower. She had last been seen alive at 7 p.m. Surveillance cameras showed someone following her around 8 p.m., but the pursuer left alone and exited the school. Lily's parents raised the alarm when she failed to contact them, and the police were informed. A night guard discovered her body in a pool of blood with severe head injuries. After recovering from the shock, he called emergency services. Later, detectives invited a family friend to identify the body, which was difficult due to the severity of the injuries. The news of Lily's death sparked an outpouring of grief from the community. Her home was filled with friends, neighbors, and acquaintances offering support to her family. Locals also paid their respects, leaving flowers and toys outside her home, creating a memorial. In a shocking twist, another tragic death occurred on October 27, 2023, at 8 a.m., just 11 miles from the scene of Lily's death. A man's remains were discovered on the rocks of Diamond Bay Reserve, near Vaucluse, an eastern suburb of Sydney. After the police were called, a rescue team was quickly assembled, including a bomb squad, Marine Corps, and a rescue helicopter. At 3:30 p.m., they recovered the man's body and took it to forensic experts for identification. Due to the severity of his injuries from a high fall, visual identification was not possible, so fingerprints were used instead. The experts suspected the man's identity, but they needed confirmation. Eventually, They identified the body as 24-year-old Paul, who was suspected of committing a crime against Lily James. Investigators now had to piece together the connection between the two fatal incidents and uncover what had happened between them. Paul's later attempts to make amends and apologize were rebuffed by Lily, who remained unforgiving. She took comfort in the fact that their brief relationship had at least revealed his true nature to her. Born in 1999 in the Netherlands, Paul came from a wealthy and prominent family. When his father's job required a move to Australia in 2015, Paul and his family relocated. As an only child, he received excessive attention and pampering, which contributed to his selfish and entitled personality. Paul thrived academically and athletically at St. Andrew's Cathedral School, where he excelled in cricket and eventually became team captain. He was also involved in organizing extracurricular activities and festivals. While some of his peers found his confidence off-putting, he was charming and charismatic around girls. After graduating in 2017, Paul landed a job as an assistant coach for cricket and hockey. By early 2018, he took over the management of these sports teams. Despite feeling confident in his new role, Paul suddenly resigned and returned home to his family for unknown reasons. Back home, Paul pursued further education, earning a master's degree in sports management. During a conversation with old friends, he revealed that he had honed his coaching skills, which led to a lucrative job offer from his former employer. By early 2020, Paul returned to his old school. Upon his return to Australia, Paul reunited with a former friend, and they decided to split housing costs. Paul preferred shared living, despite being able to afford a solo apartment. Their economically priced apartment was in Kensington, a suburb of Sydney. Initially, the friends got along, socializing at bars after work. However, a few months later, tensions arose, and Paul decided to live alone due to their conflict. The Theson's son, Paul, felt isolated despite being constantly surrounded by people. His parents suspected he had not had a serious romantic relationship. In March 2020, an 18-month lockdown in Australia, Paul was stuck in the country, unable to visit his family due to the risk of infection. The strict quarantine measures affected every aspect of life, forcing Paul to rely on himself. By summer 2021, life had returned to normal. However, it became apparent that the isolation had taken a toll on Paul's relationships. When he resumed his activities, people noticed a change in his character and behavior. Paul bounced back, becoming a key player on the hockey team and maintaining an active lifestyle, even appearing in match advertisements. Paul's behavior became increasingly disturbing. Friends and acquaintances reported seeing him lash out in uncontrollable anger, a side of him they had never witnessed before. Rumors also circulated at school that he had an inappropriate interest in his female students, often flirting with them and making them feel uncomfortable. Despite this, Paul was still highly regarded for his coaching skills, which significantly contributed to the team's success in the Australian Hockey League. However, his personal life began to unravel when his girlfriend Lily ended their relationship after he was put on trial. The investigation into Paul's involvement in her murder quickly gained momentum. Surveillance cameras inside and outside the area where the body was found played a crucial role in identifying him as the prime suspect. The police also tracked his movements using his cell phone's GPS and contacted his service provider to determine his last known location. The police were also eager to find the victim's phone, hoping it would contain clues about the events leading up to her death. After tracing the locations of the devices, they reconstructed the timeline of events and found that Paul had purchased a hammer at a hardware store a couple of days before the attack. It appeared that Paul was consumed by anger and decided to confront the girl violently. Lily's innocence in the situation was clear, but the events that unfolded were as follows. On the morning of October 25th, Lily went to the university and then to her job in the afternoon. Meanwhile, her ex-boyfriend rented a silver Lexus and drove to the school, but he didn't enter the building because he had no classes. Instead, he waited in the car. After the students left the building, the perpetrator walked to the gym, hiding a hammer under his jacket. He waited for Lily to finish her training, then followed her when she went to freshen up and take a shower. This was when Lily was most vulnerable, and the perpetrator attacked her, striking her head. According to pathologists, her death was instantaneous, and she did not suffer. An hour later, he gathered Lily's personal belongings in a backpack and left the building. He got into his car and drove to Diamond Bay, where he disposed of the hammer in a garbage container. Security cameras recorded him at the reserve at 8:47 p.m. Paul's last known location, as tracked by investigators, was The Gap, a cliff in Sydney's eastern suburb of South Head. The Gap is a popular tourist spot, but it's also infamous for its history of suicides. At around 10 p.m., Paul used Lily's phone to send a message to someone called James, which would ultimately lead to the discovery of the girl's body. It's unclear why Paul did this. Possibly he felt remorseful and wanted to ensure the girl received help. Or maybe he was simply telling her parents where they could find their daughter. He made a brief emergency call an hour after the incident, but hung up. He then went to a cliff and took his own life, which had been a decision he had been considering for a long time. When the police arrived, they found the personal belongings of him and his former lover, as well as a rented car parked nearby. It seemed clear that he was no longer alive, possibly due to his inability to cope with his guilt or face the consequences of his actions. The priority was now to find his body. A search operation began on October 26th at 9 a.m., with police helicopters and boats patrolling the coastline and cordoning off the area around the cliff at Diamond Bay. However, no body was found on the first day. The next day, his body washed up on the rocks of the reserve. After an autopsy, Paul was officially declared responsible for Lily James's death. Although it was impossible to hold him accountable due to his own death, the criminal case was closed. His parents received his body and decided to cremate him and scatter his ashes in Sydney, rather than returning him to the Netherlands. Lily's funeral was held on November 17, 2023, at her former school in Hurstville, where around 500 people gathered to bid farewell to a loved one, friend, and coach. The school administration arranged a live broadcast of the ceremony. In line with Lily's lively and vibrant personality, her family requested that attendees wear bright colors instead of traditional dark attire. The ceremony was filled with heartfelt tributes to Lily, as speakers shared warm and sincere words about her. The James family expressed gratitude to everyone who had supported them during their difficult time. Outside the building, students and colleagues created a makeshift memorial featuring Lily's favorite flowers, accompanied by farewell letters as a sign of respect and admiration. After the investigation into Lily's tragic death was completed, the school management sent a follow-up email to parents, apologizing for the impact of the tragedy and assuring them that the incident was unforeseen and would not happen again. While many were shocked that a place of safety had been breached, the administration encouraged students to view this as an isolated incident and to continue their education with renewed enthusiasm. Renowned forensic psychologist Tim Watson-Monroe, an expert in analyzing the minds of both criminals and victims, was consulted about Paul's actions. His analysis revealed that Paul's behavior was characteristic of individuals with inflated self-esteem who cannot accept rejection. According to Monroe, Paul did not act impulsively, but rather deliberately and without remorse. Monroe believed that Paul took his own life to avoid taking responsibility and facing shame for his actions. He described Paul as a narcissistic individual with psychopathic tendencies. Monroe also distinguished Paul's case from the tragic tale of Romeo and Juliet, as their narratives were fundamentally different. Ultimately, Paul's pride and ego clouded his judgment, leading him to make devastating decisions. He failed to appreciate the love and companionship of Lily, and instead chose deceit and betrayal. In the end, Paul's selfishness resulted in the loss of Lily's life, as well as enduring suffering for both their families. His actions were a bitter repayment for the care and attention he received from those who loved him